Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto has adamantium bones council bashing. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Contramancer and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. First seal, assault. The pain was fading, that was certain enough, but it was fading slowly. As the boy, bruised and beaten, cut in several places by sheer impact trauma, forced his one good eye open, and that only halfway from the swelling on his face, he could feel the slight burn as his body healed again. Every year this happened. Every October 10th a mob came looking for him, and the beatings were getting worse, especially as he continued to recover. He was lifted gently by a pair of arms belonging to an ANBU in a dog mask, and the familiar jolt and bounce of a shinobi running as fast as he could began. He was heading to the hospital again, he knew. The Hokage would be there, as soon as he found out, but why couldn't he stop it from happening in the first place? The blonde boy didn't know who was doing this to him, and the people who did get caught somehow mysteriously walked free within hours with all charges dropped. He was in so much pain sometimes that he almost wished it would all stop, but then he'd hear a vague and somewhat shy giggle in the back of his mind, a soft voice that he could never quite place saying something he could never remember, and he would drag himself back up and fight for his life. Even now, when his very blood was leaving a clear trail showing the ANBU's progress, as the boy slipped into unconsciousness, he'd recall vaguely the girl, that much he was sure of, and his attacking the bullies who'd cornered her. He'd lost, of course, but he'd fought them hard, drawing their attention, and luring them away from their first target. Some days, he wished he could remember who she was, but the 5 boys had beaten him harshly, even if he'd given well nigh as good as he got. The girl's minder had shown up and bought the bully's story that Naruto had been bothering the girl, and delivered a strike to the boy's head, ignoring the protest of the girl. As she knelt beside him that day, he'd heard her apologizing, thanking him for saving her, before being dragged away. The doctors and nurses at the hospital were indifferent to the boy. As long as the ANBU was watching they did their jobs, but the second he left to report to the Hokage, they left him in a room alone, to die or live, as he had a distressing tendency to survive. The boy had heard the hate-filled epithets they muttered at him before, and though they puzzled him, he had long since grown inured to them. It was not living he was doing now, it was surviving. He'd made up his mind that he would be Hokage one day, and he would manage it if only for her. The white-haired young medic Nin looked at the boy's chart. The way this Uzumaki brat was healing was incredibly rapid, almost unnatural. Maybe he could use that to find a cure for his master's disciple. It would take a lot of planning, but if it worked. Naruto opened his sapphire blue eyes to see a ceiling that had been spattered with something brown, almost black in some places. To one side, he could see a table with silvery instruments arrayed upon it, and 2 men discussing some kind of notes. He was firmly secured to the table, and to the other side, if he twisted his eyes far enough, he could make out another table with someone strapped to it. Even as he watched, he saw the taller and skinnier man, who had strange yellow eyes, collect a shard of what looked like bone from the other person's chest. Since there were no screams, the other person must have been unconscious. As the 2 upright figures stood over him, the taller one spoke in a voice that seemed designed to give people the creeps. "Oh good, you're awake," he said, smiling sadistically. "This experiment is most likely going to hurt a little." The searing pain as the shorter man opened the flesh of Naruto's chest with a scalpel and quickly cracked the sternum caused the boy to scream in agony, and he hadn't screamed when the mob had come for him. The taller man inserted the shard of bone into the fracture in Naruto's breastbone, and the 2 men then sewed the wound shut. "Over the next few days, this is going to hurt a little more," the snake-eyed man explained. "Either you'll survive, in which case you might be useful, or you'll die, and we can dissect you to see what went wrong. It's a win-win situation for me." As the blonde boy, barely 9 years old, drifted into the oblivion of unconsciousness once more, the experiment began. The shinobi of Konoha were mobilized by the order of the Hokage, and sent out to find Naruto within minutes of the boy being reported missing. Since that didn't happen until the ANBU in the dog mask stopped by the hospital at noon the next day, the chances of finding him were significantly reduced. A great many ninja didn't put much effort into the search, wanting nothing to do with the demon child, not that they said it in as many words, of course. But if an Inuzuka overlooked a scent here until the trail was cold, or a Hyuga or Uchiha forgot to activate their Dijitsu there, who could prove otherwise? And as for the few who actively concealed evidence, well, the root program had been shut down, so they couldn't possibly exist, could they? The boy had lost track of so much time. As bone shards were inserted all over his body, one at a time, he was hurt more and more, he got weaker, his senses shut down. In short, he was dying. The snake-eyed man, called Orochimaru-sama by his subordinates, watched. The experiment was failing. Kimimaro could no longer afford to donate bone shards. If it hadn't been for the blonde brat's marrow, injected directly into his bones, Kimimaro would have been useless long ago. These reports had the brat healing well for the first few weeks, but then his bones had begun their breakdown. At this point, the boy was a burden on their resources. Ironically, much like the Konoha medics, the researchers here relegated the boy to some out-of-the-way corner to die. Naruto knew he was dying. It was hard not to as his hearing dulled, his eyesight dimmed and his sense of smell and taste shut down. The very act of moving too fast was enough to break bones now, and too fast was any motion quicker than a slow, time-consuming crawl. Since he was of little other use, the researchers had attempted to strengthen his failing bones with that silvery, chakra-conductive metal, but with little effect. In fact, the malaise that seemed to be breaking the boy down was corroding the metal implants, breaking them down, and whisking them away through his bloodstream. Now all he could do was wait for death. As he closed his eyes one more time, uncertain if they'd ever open again, he saw that vague silhouette of that girl, and wished he at least knew who she was. It had been 3 months since Naruto disappeared. No one was looking anymore, except the white-haired old spy master Jiraiya. He'd even given up writing to search, a fact that depressed the former ANBU called Hatake Kakashi. But he was the only one allowed to look, by order of the council. It hadn't been a unanimous vote, but for some reason the edict had gone out. The Toad Sage had spent a week lamenting the fact that his information network in his home village was underdeveloped, say rather, non-existent, and had then thrown himself into both building it up and investigating the disappearance. In a move uncharacteristic for him, the legendary super pervert even eschewed his research in favor of these tasks, and did not like the results or rather, the lack of them. Someone was sabotaging his efforts. The academy took in its next class in another 3 months, and most of the prospective students couldn't care less about this whole mess. A number of them were even glad that the incorrigible prankster was gone. But there was one little girl who looked around shyly, searching for him with her pale, moon-like eyes and quietly crying at his absence. Every day, in the corner of her garden, she would open a bento box and put out enough lunch for a person to eat, remembering a boy who had saved her. It was ironic, in a way, that the very neglect that threatened Naruto's life, the wasting of his bones, led to his salvation. Deep inside the seal on his belly, a seal none had seen, for the boy could not channel chakra yet, nor mold it to any purpose. The Kyubi no Yoko took note of its jailer's plight. In the boy's weakened state it was easy to see the seal that trapped the Biju within him, at least from here in Naruto's mindscape, and the effects were going to carry both boy and beast into the afterlife. Spiteful as he could be, the demon fox wanted to live a lot more than he wanted revenge on his prison. Of course, he couldn't reach past the seal to do much without the damn thing triggering. All he could do was send out his chakra in a blind attempt to heal the boy, and he didn't know enough about humans for it to do any good. On top of that were the several shards of foreign bone in the boy, and the tissue rejection issues they were causing, as well as the boy's general shutdown. Fortunately, perhaps, the Kyubi could feel he wasn't alone in here. The seal held 2 more segments of chakra, suppressed and contained for specific triggers. He could feel these triggers, and knew how to set them off, and those chakra signatures wouldn't trip the seal's failsafes. He just had to do this right. Stretching out with the thickest strand of his demonic chakra he could manage without tripping the seal, the fox gently eased the boy into his mindscape, a vast, sewer-like construction with a single incongruous ray of sunlight. Usually, the thing was overflowing with stagnant water, but in Naruto's current state of mind, it was blood, thick and black. Although Naruto was shocked and scared when he saw the Kyubi, he was truly beyond caring what happened to him. "Wake up, boy," the demon rumbled, its words appearing in Naruto's strained mind without passing through his ears. "Or don't you want to find out who the girl is?" Struggling to stand, the blonde boy leaned against the bars. "I'm dying. Looks like I go to Jigaku if I'm seeing the fox that the Yondaime Hokage killed." He was too hurt to flinch as the killing intent of the Kyubi washed through him. "Kill me," he roared. "That man barely had the power to seal me. And he was the strongest leader your village had ever seen." Shaking his head, the demon fox pushed his temper aside. Living was more important at the moment. "Boy, if you want to live, you're going to have to pull down that seal. That will release what you need to survive." It seemed a simple enough proposition, even to Naruto, but the very simplicity made it suspect. "And if I don't? Then we both die and your village will probably fall in as little as 5 years, the Kyubi replied, pulling a wild guess from thin air. His eyes narrowed as he went for the weak spot. "Including that cute little vixen you can never quite recall." That did the trick. Naruto reached up with the full intent to shred that seal and found his wrist caught by a man who greatly resembled the Yondaime. The demon fox didn't even pause for breath or to let the man speak as he extended a tendril of his power towards the boy, commanding, as he did so, "Master it, boy, take it inside you and claim it." Without thinking, Naruto attempted that very thing, even as a confused-looking Yondaime glared at the fox. The effort smashed the boy's conscious mind deeper into oblivion, even as a red-haired woman appeared. The last he knew of anything was the fox's voice. "We don't have time, he and by extension that means me as well, we're dying. I have the power to fix it, but can't reach beyond the seal, and don't know how. The 2 of you can, and may just know enough." Had anyone thought to check, they might have noticed the boy sweating and curling into a ball, racked with pain as red chakra surged through him in a curiously controlled manner, supercharging his immune system and laying hold of any material it could use to rebuild him. His senses were rebuilt, sharper than ever, more potent, sight and sound and scent. His bones were strengthened and healed, stronger than ever, shifted around as Kimimara's Kekei Genkai was assimilated in a unique manner, as claws, blades of bone stronger than tempered steel, grew within his arms, and the muscles and nerves surrounding them shifted to facilitate their use. The bones were further strengthened as the remnants of the chakra-conductive metal were retrieved from within his system, and plated onto and tempered with his bones. The last and possibly most essential phase was the enhancement of the Kekii Genkai of the Uzumaki line, the unknown factor that allowed them to heal quickly and resist diseases and poisons, as well as maintain a lifespan at least half again that of others. This would mean his wounds would heal impossibly fast, and his immune system would vastly increase, rendering him almost immune to toxins and illness. As the chakra infusions that were all that was left of Namikaze's Minato and Uzumaki Kushina faded, the Yandame's echo turned to the demon fox. You've only got 3 hours, use them well, and get him to somewhere or someone safe if you can. He then suppressed the seal as he faded away, smiling at Kushina, sacrificing themselves for their son a second time. It was perhaps fortunate for Orochimaru that he, Kimimaro and his top spy from Konoha were not present when this happened. Over the course of 2 hours, every living creature in the base that was not a prisoner was used to paint the walls a most horrific shade of red, and then, leaving a number of dazed and terrified former experiments and prisoners behind, although in Orochimaru's strongholds the difference was negligible. The creature that had slaughtered so many tore across the countryside at top speed. Senju Tsunade glared at the dice before her. The hard sixes. 6 times she'd rolled, asking the proprietor if someone might have swapped out her dice for loaded ones. No one else who'd rolled them had managed to score the highest hand in the game. One more time she picked the dice up, all 6 of them, dropping them one by one into the cup, rattling it hard, and casting them. Again, the 6 dice all showed the same face, the circle of 6 dots representing a crown. Pushing her winnings across the table, along with her case of IOUs, she asked a favor of the house. Could you see that these debts get paid off, please? She requested, slightly shocking her apprentice Shizen. If my luck is holding true to form, I may not live to. Gathering the rest of her things, including a purse containing a modest sum, as compared to the massive pile of Ryo she'd left inside, she immediately began to leave town, with Shizen pushing herself to keep up, with no idea what was about to happen. The savage creature that was, to all outward appearances, a 9-year-old boy, raced through the forest and the storm as though the very hounds of the hells were at his heels. Where he could, he simply forced his way through, and where he was blocked his new claws made sure that he was not blocked for long. The fox that was riding his mind, guiding him through instinct, could feel the seal beginning to close, and had little desire to collapse for what would be years to him, and wake up as a pile of wild animal droppings. So he pushed the boy's body harder, as if by sheer will he could get him somewhere safe, heading by instinct closer to Kanehigakure no Sato. When he burst out of the shrubbery onto the road, which he had not expected, he paused for a critical moment as he turned to assess where he was, and heard a pair of voices gasp in unison, and a pig squeal in fear. Focusing on the travelers he just startled, or terrorized, whatever word worked best, he saw a tall blonde woman with an oversized pair of breasts. She smelled older than she looked, for some reason, and a shorter black-haired woman with a more modest figure holding a panicking piglet. Then the seals slammed shut, and Naruto's face eased back from the savage snarl into a puzzled look, as he collapsed in the street. Tsunade stared at the boy who'd leapt from the bushes at the roadside, far too exhausted to notice them until too late. She could see the scars fading as what remained of serious wounds healed before her very eyes, in seconds rather than weeks. His clothes, what remained of them, had once been hospital issue, but were now little more than decorative ribbons. He looked familiar too, as though she'd seen him somewhere before. She shook her head as she took in the last detail, the most surprising. The blades that emerged from his hands, 3 on each a good 8 inches long and from what she could see, sharp as a razor. A Kekii Genkai, perhaps? The blades seemed to be metal, too, that chakra-sensitive alloy that some shinobi use for their weapons. Still, he was a boy, and unconscious. Sighing, she picked him up, and stroked the muscles of his arms like a cat's paws, hoping the blades would retract. They did, and the queen of slugs and elixirs turned to her apprentice. We'd better set up camp for the night, Shizen. We're not going to get far now. As they stepped from the road, Tsunade increased the chakra flow to her muscles a fraction. From the weight of the boy, she'd guessed that his entire skeleton was that bone-metal amalgam, and that his muscles were sturdier to handle the extra mass. The little gaki was heavy. Naruto opened his eyes, and immediately regretted it. They were extremely sensitive, and the sunlight he stared up into was painfully bright until they adjusted. Rubbing at his eyes as he rolled to face away from the sky, he learned his muscles were incredibly sore. The pain was fading, almost completely gone in fact, but there was a residual ache that was slow to depart. He could hear breathing from nearby, and looked in that direction. Over 10 feet away, the 2 women, looking vaguely familiar, he didn't have much recall of how he got here, were sitting by a small fire, discussing something in some scroll they were looking at. As he lifted himself, absently noticing he was heavier than he remembered, they looked in his direction. Their voices were incredibly loud to his ears, and he covered both with his hands to filter the noises. The old one who didn't look it smelled overwhelmingly of sake, and the other had some rather acrid sense about her. It looked like this would be quite the challenge. Jiraiya was following a lead. Somewhere out in this direction was one of Orochimaru's little strongholds, and it was in this direction that his meager clues brought him. As he trudged along, he came to a gambling den where he overheard an interesting snippet of conversation. So there she was, all night, casting the worst hands possible at any given time, and she's about to chuck it in as a bad lot when Kadama eggs her into putting everything she's got left on the hard sixes. She goes in one better and calls hard sixes by 7, apparently figuring if she won she could clear her debts. But if she lost, it wasn't like she'd owe us any more. The speaker was a rough-looking gambler type with a case of IOUs and another filled with money, gradually dispensing the latter to the proper claims of the former as he spoke. Please bear in mind this is the legendary sucker. As the other gamblers chuckled, Jiraiya frowned. Tsunade was out this way as well? That was quite a coincidence. He returned his attention to the gambler's story. So yeah, Kodama covers it, figuring it's a sure thing, and puts his stake all in. Then she casts them, 7 times. The hard sixes, the ring of crowns, whatever you want to call it. She frowns a bit, and casts twice more. Same thing, and Kodama's about to call her for cheating when she passes me the dice and asks if someone switched them out. Beats him to it, so of course I send them round the table once, and they're just regular dice. Even Kodama gets them, and double-checks them, so she gets the dice back and throws again and again and again. Now she's really staring at the dice, glaring at them almost, and she throws her last hand. Hard sixes. She's won, and asks me to see to her debts. Kodama insists she's got to be using loaded dice and points at her as she's leaving, and an extra set of dice falls out of his sleeve. Now everyone sees how suspicious that is, so I pick up the dice on the table and cast. Sure enough, they're loaded for all the ones. Seems Kodama switched them when he was looking them over. So we had Oniyama take him out back to discuss things with him. As the gamblers laughed riotously, the Toad Sage calmly walked away, at least to outward appearances. No one knew better than he how Tsunade's luck ran. If she'd scored such a massive win, her life was most likely in danger. Breaking into a run, he chased her rumored path from the village. Naruto stared at the claws that extended from his hand. After explaining where they'd found him, or rather, he'd found them, they had told him of what they'd seen. He'd always healed quickly, if not this fast, and he'd rapidly learned how to focus his senses, from self-defense if nothing else, but they'd had to help coax the 3 blades from his arm. There was a particular muscular twist to it, and a similar one to retract them, and of course, he had to want them to do so. A moment's testing was all they needed to determine that yes, his bones were all melded with the silvery chakra conductive metal that now laced them. It presented an interesting idea for a shinobi to have weapons that couldn't be taken away from them, but in most such cases rejection issues clouded what was possible. As the 3 packed up their camp, the older lady Tsunade spoke. I can't believe we forgot to ask Gaki, she apologized sort of. What's your name? Naruto, he replied, handing Shizen the folded bedding to place in a storage seal. Uzumaki Naruto. He realized, falsely, that these 2 nice women wouldn't want to travel with him anymore, and sighed as the Sannin lady stiffened, which to his young mind confirmed his guess. If you could just point the way to Konoha, I'll get out of your hair, sorry to bother you. He lost what he was trying to say as Tsunade grabbed his shoulders and began investigating his face. Yes, her features were there, a little harder at the edges. Mixed with the father's and with that blonde mop, there was only one person that could be. Seeing the fear start to rise in his face, she loosened her grip as she crouched, talking with him on an eye-to-eye level. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. It's just I knew your mother. When I heard she was killed, I was told her child, her son, didn't survive, that he'd been killed by the Kyuubi. A vague image rose in Naruto's mind. The 3 figures he'd seen last night, working together, the Kyuubi providing the chakra, the redhead focusing it, and the yondaime directing it into him. He didn't know who they were, but from what the Hokage had said to him, they were probably his parents. He couldn't picture anyone else, with a handful of exceptions including these 2 nice ladies, who cared enough to save him. He was about to speak when a sudden explosion of smoke burst in front of them, and an old white-haired man in red and green, standing on the back of an outsized toad, appeared, beginning to loudly proclaim himself, hurting the boy's ears. Jiraiya had spotted the boy, and with the 2 women distracted, had decided on a fine prank to get back in the swing of his normal routine. As he appeared, he began his speech, hoping to impress Naruto and tick off Tsunade, just a little. Attend, he cried, striking a pose on the back of Gamatoro, one of the battletoads of Mount Maiboka. I am the mighty Toad Sage. His planned speech was cut short as Naruto flicked his arms outward and his claws sprang forth with a meaty snick. By instinct, the boy crossed the blades across his chest, guarding his vitals as he watched the intruder. He was worried, but if these nice ladies were in trouble, he'd help them. Not that it seemed necessary, as Tsunade gritted out the newcomer's name, in pieces. Jiraiya, she said, almost sweetly if you could ignore the grinding teeth behind it. As he glanced in her direction, she hit him, driving him hard across the clearing until he hit a tree on the far side. We just got him. Calm down, you old fool, she hissed in the aftermath as Naruto put his claws away, making the mental note not to piss her off unless he really had to. Second seal, return. Explaining things to Jiraiya took time, especially when they hadn't heard Naruto's side of the story yet. Horrified by what had happened to him, Jiraiya came to a decision fairly rapidly once all their stories were told. What Naruto hadn't been able to understand, however, was something far more basic. Lady Tsunade, he said, respect for someone that strong was a good thing, he thought. If you were told I was dead, and he knew I was alive, why didn't you 2 ever compare notes? Why didn't one of you, since you both knew my parents, make sure I was okay? Jiraiya cast his mind back, striving to recall every time the subject of Naruto's well-being had come up. He could recall talking to his old sensei, the Sandaime Hokage, but there was more. Someone else was always there. A man with a heavily bandaged arm and face. Shimura Danzu. Why, he didn't know, but it was very suspicious. Naruto, I was always told you were doing fine, he explained. I trusted the man who told me that, and perhaps I shouldn't have, but that was my mistake. I don't know how I'm going to make it up to you, though. He paused a moment. I have a plan. I'm the only one left looking for you, Naruto, so I can pretend to keep searching, throwing people off the scent. It was mostly luck I found you this time anyway. If Lady Tsunade is willing, would you like to get some early training for the academy from her and Shizen? The Toad Sage was pointedly ignoring the glares from his old teammate at this point. Sighing, Tsunade turned to the boy. Truth be told, he was safer out here with her than he was in Konoha for now. Maybe they could figure out what had happened to him, and why his abilities were so far enhanced. I'm happy to teach you if you want, Naruto, she agreed, deciding to pass the first part of his training off on Shizen. But I'm not sure how much you can learn before the academy starts. Nodding, Jiraiya spoke up again. I'll report to the old man that you're taking him under your wing after finding him, to help him recover from the after effects of Orochimaru's experiments. I guess we can just thank our lucky stars that our former teammate didn't realize what he had in Naruto. Once he's up to par, you'll send word, and I'll come and bring him home. Does that sound good? The adults all nodded, and Naruto put his chin in his hand as he thought. I guess I'm going to miss Ichiraku Ramen though. The Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, the professor, the god of shinobi, sat staring at Jiraiya's mission report, before destroying it with a quick, localized fire jutsu. Danzu would never find out about this if he had anything to do with it. Turning to his former student, he asked the question he'd been dreading. Your opinion? Jiraiya leaned against the wall. Physically, the kid's fine. A little traumatized by the experiments old Snake Lips performed, but Tsunade can handle that. The effects that resulted? No idea. I found the stronghold afterwards, and I'm fairly sure that the kid doesn't even realize what happened to the guards and researchers there. It's possible his traveling companion dealt with them for him, but then why would it release him? He shook his head, too many questions there, including, why didn't the Kyuubi kill the other victims? Returning to the topic at hand, he chuckled. You should have seen him, sensei, he said. The way he lit up when he heard that he'd be getting a head start on the academy. At least he'll be on par with some of the clan-taught cadets. But then there's those claws. Have you ever heard of a Kekkai Genkai involving bones or metal before? Hiruzen stroked his pointed beard. Metal? There's the Byakuya clan in Kumo, maybe, but I think they're just gifted weaponsmiths. As for bone, there was the Kagai clan in Nizuno Kuni, but they were wiped out in the bloodline purges. If there's even one left, I'd be surprised. He was even more thoughtful. If this new trait became a Kekkai Genkai, that would mean Naruto had 2 bloodline limits. No one else in Konoha had that. It had been tried, of course, and back in the Nidaime Hokage's reign there had been an ill-fated romance between a Hyuga girl and an Uchiha boy. Sadly, all their children had been born blind, so both clans had passed laws, as had the village, prohibiting children from such unions. If anyone found out about it, the blasted village council, the civilian side at least, would try to enforce that Curciare, the Clan Restoration Act. Hiruzen thought the end of that acronym lacked a P. They'd slipped it into existence between the death of the Yondaime and his taking the reins again, and he didn't have the support to overturn it yet. If he could get all the shinobi clans and a few civilians on his side, it would be another matter. Lifting his head, he turned to the window as he spoke. I'm trying to see a way out of this, but I'm walking in the dark, he whispered. His former student grinned. So let's start a fire, he replied. Orochimaru stared at the charred ruins that had once been one of his strongholds. It was utterly destroyed for his purposes now. As he'd explored the facility before putting it to the torch, he had to admit that whoever had done this had a certain flair for decorating. He giggled as he stepped over body parts. From some of the damage, if he hadn't known any better, he'd have sworn that he'd turned Kimimaro loose on the place. No survivors, and all prisoners/experimental subjects had been liberated. Oh well, time for a change of scenery anyway, he said as he set off towards the north, and Ta no Kuni. The next Chunin exams in Konoha are in 3 years, and I need my pieces in place by then. Hinata was miserable. Her father was a strict man, unbending at times, but he'd been forced to it by the deaths of his twin in that mess when she was 3, and then his wife, her mother from complications following the birth of Hanabi, her little sister. The division in the Hyuga clan didn't help anything, either, and even her cousin Niji was disdainful of her weakness since that day long ago. She'd secretly spied on the blonde boy who'd taken the beating of those bullies for her, while she wished she'd been able to help him. Even if she just distracted one, she felt it would have been enough, that Naruto would have managed to take the other 4, and then, she was interrupted in her musings by her sister's demands to fight her. Hanabi was proving something of a prodigy, and was easily able to defeat her big sister in the sparring matches, mostly because she refused to accept the gentle touches Hinata used as the nigh-crippling blows they would have been with chakra behind them. The elders seemed to back the younger girl's arrogance. It was almost as if they wanted the children of Hayashi to cripple one another, and Niji had been caught up in a fatalistic display, always going on about fate this and destiny that it was depressing. Even if Hinata were to use the full force of the gentle fist, she knew exactly where that would get her. the elders would accuse her of trying to cripple her sister, and cast doubt on her suitability as the heiress that way. Sighing, she went to lose again. Kakashi stood by the memorial stone, staring at a number of names he knew well, all dead and gone. Namikaze Minato, his sensei, died sealing the Kyuubi, and his wife Uzumaki Kushina with him, holding down the demon fox so he could. Uchiha Obito, his best friend and the source of his Sharingan eye, died protecting his team on a mission that had gone bad. Noera Rin, his other teammate, a strong medic Nin and a girl he might have married, died at his hand rather than destroy the village when the standby that was sealed into her broke free. There were many others. He dreaded having to put the names of cadets up there, but it happened. The Hokage had asked him to assess graduating teams with an eye toward shinobi work, and he knew that he would accept nothing less than the best. Looking at the two bells in his hand, he set off towards the academy. The weeks passed slowly, and Naruto grew stronger. His teachers had introduced him to chakra manipulation, and he'd taken to it like a duck to water. Reading and writing lessons saw him more reluctant, but Tsunade had made him a deal, get it all to her standard by the time they got back to Konoha, and she'd buy him all he could eat at that Ichiraka ramen place. So the blonde knucklehead was motivated to study. As the lessons progressed, he found his chakra control was iffy. His massive reserves were the most likely cause of this, he was told. It was like the difference between damming a creek and damming a river. You needed more for the river than the creek, so his progress there would be slow. It might take years to master, and they had other lessons. His control wasn't fine enough for medical jutsu, so they taught him what they could of the basic procedures of emergency medicine that didn't need his chakra, while Shizen started him off to find a taijutsu style that suited him, preferably one that adapted well to his claws, and left room for his potential Kekkei Genkai, if he turned out to have one but those claws hadn't come from nowhere. Tsunade researched his changes as best she could. Naruto learned a lot from the two medical kunoichi. Jiraiya visited on occasion, when he happened to be in the area, and he started Naruto on the basics of what he said was his father's specialty. Not that he mentioned him by name, he told the disappointed boy that only 3 people had the right to tell him, and he wasn't one of them. Fuin Jutsu, the art of sealing. It was a lot of theory, involved math, and the study of symbols, but by the time Naruto returned to Konoha, he could manage a small storage seal. Naruto began to suspect that his abduction may have been the best thing that ever happened to him, and then he remembered the pain not even the village's annual mob had inflicted anywhere near that level of pain and agony upon him. Jiraiya looked on as Tsunade counted out the boy's share of the group's cash, which she then placed in a storage seal that he put in a pocket. Jiraiya looked at the boy's loud orange outfit, too, and shook his head. "Do you really think it's possible to be stealthy in that outfit?" he asked. The outfit in question was a pair of pants and jacket over a mesh shirt. "I mean, really, Kid Orange?" Naruto had had time to think on this one. "What color's a tiger, Ero-senin?" He'd caught the old man riding one night, and peeked over his shoulder. His cry of lost innocence had brought the other Sanin and her apprentice running, shortly before Jiraiya decided he should be running, and the nickname had been coined and stuck. As the boy waved goodbye to Shizen and Tsunade, the Toad Sage paused to think. That dark blue on the jacket, the black undershirt, even the lines on the pants, all served to break up the orange outline. On top of that, from what he could see, the outfit was reversible. Damn it. He cursed to himself. The boy was right. Oh, he was going to be a real menace. He'd have to listen to his new network in Konoha very closely, just to hear about the pranks. Hinata sat on a bench just inside the gates of Konoha, well within the view of the gate guards and her minder for the day, a branch family Hyuga by the name of Ko. She wasn't happy about the man, who seemed determined to deny her enjoyment in anything. It had been he that had struck a certain boy in the head for daring to defend her from bullies, and he'd smiled as he did it, knowing the boys had been lying. As it was, she was practicing with her Byakugan, gradually building up how long she could hold it active for, and counting the birds in the trees beyond the gates. Thus it was she who first saw the approaching pair, an old man with spiky white hair, and a boy with spiky blonde hair. They were playing some kind of word game as they walked, at the same time bouncing a ball back and forth between them. As her vision focused in closer, she saw the features of the old man, but couldn't recognize him. The boy on the other hand, Naruto, was back. The Hyuga heiress went bright red and fainted, and he wasn't even in the village yet. Hyuga Ko was watching his charge as she practiced the bird-counting exercise, a task for children. That Hinata was only 9 meant little. She was the clan heiress, and should be better. On seeing her blush and faint, he activated his own Byakugan. There was only one situation that provoked that kind of reaction from Lady Hinata whenever that demon fox boy was near. There, outside the gate, with that old man. Seeing that his charge was unconscious, and the gate guards were 2 men he knew had no love for the Kyuubi brat, he spoke to them. "That demon's coming back. He's out there now. I'm going to stop him. Want to help?" 2 quick nods and the impromptu assassination squad assembled, stepping outside the village and vanishing. The old man had to be distracted, and that was the task before Kurai, the younger of the 2 guards. The older, Hattori, was the lookout and backup in case something went wrong. As they closed in, the plan started out perfectly. Kurai stepped out and threw a smoke bomb, and the old man moved after him, having let his guard down this close to Konoha, not expecting a threat from inside the village, which he should have. Was he slipping in his old age? It was then that Hyuga made his attack, a kunai in each hand. The boy had limited strength and leverage. He might have been able to hold back one arm, but certainly not two. It is said that battle plans seldom survive contact with the enemy, and KO's hastily assembled attack lacked three very important pieces of information. First, the old man was the Toad Sage, with quicker reactions than most and decades more experience than his foes. Second, Naruto's new changes had given him a veritable arsenal for blunt trauma, even if he didn't extend his claws to cut his enemies. And third, Naruto had been trained by Tsunade, for whom the term extreme blunt force trauma was a severe understatement. As the kunai came down at speed, Naruto stepped forward, just as Shizen had drilled him, and raised both forearms in a chopping motion, not so much an aggressive block, as a simultaneous directed blow at his attacker's elbows, which were easier to reach than his wrists, descending faster. The bone metal in the young Jinchuriki's fists and arms took the impact easily, and KO's arms bent at the elbows in the wrong direction with a sickening crack. Naruto didn't stop there, unfortunately, following his taijutsu style that he and Shizen had begun to hammer out 1 part monkey style, 1 part tiger style, and 3 parts street fights and brawling. As Ko dropped to his knees in pain, trying in vain to clutch his arms close, Naruto's hands pushed the adult Hyuga's arms out wide, something unpleasant for Ko to say the least, and drove his head forward to impact squarely on the man's hitai with a sound not unlike a bell, rolling the man's white eyes back in his head as he dropped into unconsciousness. Jiraiya had rounded up the derelict guards and strode into the village with one on each shoulder, even as the blonde boy dragged his opponent into the village. It was a pity he hadn't mastered Lady Tsunade's strength augmentation yet, or he would have thrown the man. Naruto had a vague image of him in his head, and a dislike bordering on hatred. Leaving the securely bound gate guards and the incapacitated Ko, who later needed minor surgery to remove his hitai from his forehead, Jiraiya pointed at the nearby bench with its unconscious occupant. "Naruto, you wait there while I go report this," he ordered. Naruto nodded. The difference between serious Jiraiya and regular Erosenin was something the two of them had hashed out in short order. "Keep an eye on the girl in the gate. If an invasion occurs, ask yourself what I would do." The 9-year-old boy grinned. "Pick up the girl and run?" He cheeked, startling a laugh from the old man, even as he sat beside her, noticing her scent. She smelled of a garden and sunlight, he decided. It was a good scent, one he'd remember. Shaking his head, Jiraiya leapt to the rooftops and went to report. The bench was a comfortable place, and Naruto was not hard tasked by Jiraiya's directives. His thoughts wandered back to the first few days after Tsunade and Shizen had taken him in. At first he'd been fine, but then the nightmares would set in, and the snake-eyed man would come back for him, with a set of scalpels and a giggled, "Can't have you running around with my property, now can we?" And as the knives made their first cut he would wake from the horrors and tremble, a cold sweat covering him as he cried, screaming, "Why? Why did he do this to me?" It had taken Tsunade and Shizen both a long time to get through to him. There was no way they could tell why Orochimaru had done this. He was insane, and obsessed with collecting jutsu, and the Kekkai Genkai were, by definition, jutsu he couldn't have. So he wanted them even more. It was Tsunade's words that made the most sense to him though. If Orochimaru could be understood by us, truly understood, that would mean either we were as mad as he is, or that he was sane. Since he obviously isn't, maybe it's a good thing we can't understand him. He still had the nightmares, but they were less frequent, and he rarely woke up with his claws ready anymore. The blonde Jinchuriki glanced at the sleeping girl as a breeze whispered across them, and she shivered. Taking off his jacket, he laid it over the girl, and returned to his vigil, waiting for someone to come. "He's that strong?" Hiruzen asked in a serious tone. It was just bad timing on Jiraiya's part that Danza had been here when he came to report in. The old warhawk had demanded the boy be arrested for attacking the guards, only to be shot down. They were outside the village, and approaching peacefully while playing a game, and they were attacked by our guards who'd abandoned their posts, and a Hyuga ninja who abandoned his charge, the Hokage said wearily. "If anyone should be punished, I believe it should be the ones who started the attack." He waved away Danza's advice. "So where is he?" Jiraiya snorted. "As if I'd leave the gate unguarded. He's down there keeping an eye out for us, and watching the Hyuga girl sleep. I'd get us some trusted ANBU and new guards down there quickly, were I you." Hiruzen nodded and rang the bell by his desk. His assistant poked his head through the doorway. "I need Cat's ANBU team down to the gate, with a new set of guards. The current guards and Hyuga are to be taken to Ibiki-san. Then send for Hitaki Kakashi, please," the Hokage said, and the other man nodded. Turning back to Jiraiya he went on, only to stumble to a halt. "You'd best get back to Naruto," he trailed off, for Jiraiya had obviously anticipated Hiruzen's orders. Hinata was warm, and felt safe. She didn't want to open her eyes in case she had only dreamed that the boy who'd saved her was back, after 6 months of absence. She could however hear the argument that was going on as she sat there, with someone's jacket over her that alone convinced her that Naruto's return was real. She couldn't think of anyone, not even Niji, who would put their own jacket over her simply because she was sleeping. Cracking one eye just a little, she could see her cousin, looking angry, as the blue-eyed boy stood between him and Ko. Why was her minder for the day lying there trussed up like a chicken? She began sorting through the angry noises her cousin was making, to get the gist of the fight. Niji was in his 2nd year at the academy, as opposed to regular schooling, and was trying to assert his non-existent authority from that. Naruto, at least she hoped it was Naruto, was having none of it. I was told to wait here and watch what's going on, he said, a little irritated by the older boy. It took me 10 minutes to set that fool's arms, and I'd rather you didn't cause my prisoner any more pain until after he's in TI, okay? The blunt nature of the words seemed to aggravate the Hyuga boy's sense of superiority. As if you could defeat a full-grown shinobi, he sneered, and again reached to release the wires. Naruto once again slapped Niji's hands away from Ko. He underestimated me, and didn't have anywhere near as much surprise as he thought. And if you do that again, I'll stop holding back. Niji paused as this boy, a year younger than he if he was any judge, made that threat. He was beginning to learn the real intricacies and art of the gentle fist style, and was already being praised as a genius, so he didn't feel threatened by anyone, and feared only those who were obviously better. What do you mean, holding back? He demanded, even as they were attracting an audience. Hinata had seen them all, children around their own age from the academy, and those who would be starting this year, gathering to watch the event. She straightened on the bench, and finally noticed the color of the jacket covering her. It was orange, with a red spiral in the center of the back and a white one on the left shoulder. It was Naruto. So startled was she, that she nearly missed Naruto's response. It was simple, but definitely effective. He turned and hammered his fist against a heavy wooden post, driving an imprint of his fist into the hard wood with an odd ringing sound. As the others watched the post, staring at the shape of Naruto's hand, she followed his motion. The impact was indeed impressive, but she saw the blond boy wince as he shook his knuckles, even as the split skin mended. She saw it hitting the post had gotten his point across, but she could see it hurt him. Even as she stood, attracting the attention of her cousin and Naruto, the ANBU arrived, with a new pair of guards to take over the gate watch. Behind them was the Toad Sage who waved the blonde over. "Hey, Naruto!" he yelled, startling everyone except Hinata as they finally recognized the long-absent prankster that had finally returned. As they stood and stared, realizing exactly who he was, Naruto rubbed the back of his neck absently. That was the mannerism that cinched it. He looked a little different after his ordeal, and it took an old gesture to convince the other ninja cadets of his identity. Although Hinata had recognized him from the start. "Hi guys?" he said sheepishly. "Hey, keep the jacket, I can get another one, and you look like you need it more." He darted away with the white-haired old man, even as Hinata blushed bright red. But she did put the jacket on, they noticed. It was the young Nara heir, Shikamaru, who pretty much summed up what everyone was thinking. This won't be boring, but man, this is going to be troublesome. Third seal, graduate. The Shinobi Academy of Konohagaku no Sato was considered to be second only to that of Kumogaku no Sato for the quality of its education. Although by the rumors and intelligence Jiraiya had gathered from his new network, it was declining thanks to the civilians on the council interfering with the curriculum. As he glared at the information he'd laid out on the Hokage's desk, the older man having finally been alone for once, he pointed out the discrepancies. Shinobi history in Konoha is being edited, and quite openly, too. Did you know that none of our young cadets knew about Yazushio, let alone why the entire shinobi force above Chunin wears its symbols? He spoke in a low, forceful tone. 3 years ago, a bitter Hyuga Hayashi had seen his daughter in the jacket that Naruto had given her, a jacket too large for her at the time, that she had refused to give up. Konoha now had 2 ninja candidates wearing orange and surprisingly, they made better marks in the stealth training courses than anyone else. If that's not bad enough, graduating genin candidates are only tested on 3 ninjutsu, and by coincidence, Jiraiya's tone did not agree with his words. Being heavily laden with sarcasm, those are the 3 that take the least chakra to use, even if they do require a certain amount of control. Hiruzen shook his head as he listened to his spy master. It got worse, he knew. He'd read Jiraiya's report, and knew the relevant information, so this meeting was more of a strategy session than anything else. As things stood, Naruto, with his huge reserves and terrible control, was going to fail. That a higher number of other students were also likely to, than at any point in the past decade, pointed to a conspiracy. The written tests were horrible, but when Naruto had proven able to spot a genjutsu seal on the test papers themselves that he was given, that course of sabotage had been abandoned. If it had not been for his lack of fine control, Jiraiya was certain the young Jinchuriki would have made shinobi already if that was his desire. Naruto sat on a log beside a public park, watching the children play under the watchful eyes of their parents and ninjas. He was no fool, and knew they would chase him away if they could. He'd been so close to success last time he tried, but it was no good. No matter how hard he tried, he just didn't have the fine control he needed to use the Bunshin no Jutsu. His taijutsu was up to par with the others, even if he hadn't revealed his real edge, keeping his claws concealed. To the surprise of many, he'd become adept with the tonfa, wielded in each hand, as they seemed to blend with his taijutsu quite well, although he never explained why he'd chosen them. In truth, he hadn't, but Shizen had noted on one of her trips to Konoha, Tsunade still refused to set foot in the village, even to visit Naruto, that they might be good training for when he did use his claws. It was also on one of these trips that the young medic Nin had discovered that Naruto did indeed have 2 Kekkai Genkai his own, from the Uzumaki lineage, and the second, which had most likely come about as a result of the experiments Orochimaru had performed. It was hard to explain, but she felt he would be able to channel his chakra into the manipulation of his very bones. They were well nigh indestructible after all, and the ability to manipulate them could come in handy. So far, no luck, although they did channel chakra easily. He'd been told to ask whoever his Genin squad's Jonin sensei was to explain elemental natures and chakra, as the big sister figure that Shizen had become was eager to see what he'd be able to do in that area. He'd been somewhat surprised by several of his reactions to others when he'd gotten to the academy. He wasn't surprised that Sasuke had wanted to fight him a lot when they got there, and under the eye of Mizuki-sensei, the two had found themselves squared off in the sparring ring. The basic academy style was modeled on the Uchiha style, enough so that it was hard to tell the difference at times, and the Uchiha boy had been heavily tutored until that horrible night when Itachi destroyed their clan. Not long after Sasuke entered the academy, not long after the boys' first match, in fact, when Mizuki-sensei had restricted them to academy style only, Naruto had groaned inwardly. It was all wrong for his body type. He needed a fast, sweeping style, and although the academy style's straight-line motions made it a good first style to learn, Sasuke had years on Naruto in the use of it. So Naruto had waited, and left the other boy an opening in his guard which Sasuke had promptly taken advantage of. Despite the children not having forehead protectors, the forehead is quite hard, and as the Uchiha boy's fist drove past Naruto's defense, he dropped his head a fraction and took the blow on the hardest part of the skull for anyone. With his bone metal, it was even harder on Naruto. The sickening crunch as Sasuke's hand broke was clearly audible, and the academy-style kick that laid the pain-distracted boy out was textbook perfect, despite Naruto's lack of experience. If it hadn't been for his broken hand, the blonde's opponent would have been easily able to block the knee to his gut, but as it was, he went down. As the medic Nin rushed over, Naruto added insult to injury as far as the Uchiha era was concerned, as he crouched down beside the other boy and helped set the bones in his hand. Naruto smiled as he recalled that day. He looked over towards the academy yard, where Sasuke brooded against the wall, despite being tagged as Rookie of the Year. He did keep demanding fights from Naruto, which the blue-eyed boy accepted or blew off as he felt necessary. The Uchiha was obsessed with getting stronger, and putting the worthless trash in his place. Naruto liked the place he was, thank you very much, and wasn't giving it up. He glanced over at the other boys, gathered in a group. Sometimes he'd even go along with them, but their parents were present today, as were those of everyone else, and Naruto didn't want to create friction. His gaze trailed across to the girls, where Sakura and Ino were fighting again. Before he'd been abducted, here he shuddered. A nightmare had hit him hard the night before, and he'd woken up, claws out, screaming not her. Never her. Although he couldn't remember any of the dream except that Naruto had been drifting towards the pink-haired girl, but the moment he'd set foot in the classroom had put paid to anything like that. As the banshee screech the girl had apparently perfected against Ino had caused his highly sensitive ears some major pain, so rather than sit anywhere near the cause of such pain, he instead took a different seat, one next to the girl he'd given his jacket to. She was actually wearing it then too. His eyes sharpened as he corrected an earlier thought. Not everyone had their parents present. Hinata's father wasn't there, or she would be over there with the other girls, but the distinct absence of the orange jacket she'd grown into, a little snug in some places, now, but she refused to part with it, pointed to her being. He sniffed the air, catching her scent. His ears twitched, although he wished they wouldn't, as it was a dead giveaway that he was focusing on his hearing, and he pinpointed where she was. There, behind that tree, about 10 feet behind him and to the left. He wondered why she did that, and vaguely recalled the discussion Tsunade had had with him on his last trip to see her, something about girls noticing boys before the boys noticed them, although he didn't fully understand it. Still, the academy years had been good, and he made a few friends, to an extent, and learned a lot. Tomorrow was the last day before Genin exams, an event he dreaded. Hinata, for her part, was a clever young girl. She managed to fight off fainting in Naruto's presence when he'd sat beside her that first day in class by remembering that she was already wearing his jacket, even if she was certain he didn't fully understand what he'd done by giving her those symbols. In Konoha, it was becoming widely assumed that the symbols simply meant you were a Chunin or higher shinobi, but as part of the Hyuga, she had learned of their origins, and further, she knew what the laws surrounding clan symbols were, especially those ones. The Chunin and Jonin were permitted to wear the symbols as a sign of honor and respect, but the only others who could wear them were members of those clans. Much like the Uchiha fan becoming the emblem of the village's police force, the spiral symbolized an alliance that went back to the founding of Konoha itself. The fact that he'd given her the jacket, if he'd been aware of the full connotations, would have been a major cause for celebration, to her at least, and her family had been reassessing their position on her since she started wearing it, but she'd come to a painful decision. Before they were assigned to Genin teams, she'd have to explain the symbols and return the jacket when he found out that handing over clan symbols like that could mean he was proposing to her. The next afternoon saw Naruto seated on the swing, listening to the triumph and spite and the hate-filled voices of most of the parents, as they nearly basked in the failure of the demon. He didn't miss the smirk on Hyuga Hayashi's face either, as he approached Hinata and spoke softly. The girl looked about to cry, which for some reason made the blonde angrier than any number of direct and slanted insults could. He pushed that aside to think about later. The shadow that fell across him as he sat there belonged to the last person he'd ever have suspected, Mizuki-sensei. Hearing that there was an alternate exam to graduate struck some suspicions, but Naruto was desperate to pass. "I'll do it, sensei," he said, solidifying it into a promise. "There's nothing that'll stop me, believe it." Despite second thoughts, and third and fourth thoughts as well, Naruto slipped up to the Hokage tower. The locks were quite sturdy, and the doors were solid, but this didn't slow him down by much. To all outward appearances, the door was still locked, but swift work with one of his claws through the keyhole had totally ruined the lock as a means of keeping someone out. As he stealthily moved through the halls, Naruto was thinking hard. If this was a test, then why the forbidden scroll in Hokage Tower? Surely there were better things to steal for such a test. And although he wasn't the dead last by any means, that honor had fallen to Inuzuka Kiba, who seemed to feel he could coast by on the efforts of his partner Akamaru, and the natural talents of the Inuzuka. Naruto was not the fastest to learn about new jutsu, so setting that part of the test was obviously meant to pin him down in one place out in the forest beyond the walls? Yeah, right. The more the blue-eyed Jinchuriki thought about it, the worse he suspected that something was up. His earliest teachers, Shizen, Tsunade and Jiraiya, had never mentioned this test, nor had Iruka-sensei, who despite his firm, no-nonsense attitude, seemed to genuinely like Naruto. Although not the ramen bill the boy had run up the one time he made the mistake of saying all you can eat. Most people only said that to Naruto once. So why? As Naruto disabled the security seals surrounding the scroll, he made a decision. He'd sit here and read, learning what he could, until the Hokage showed up, and explain it to him. Maybe then he could figure out something to do. Outside the tower, the Hokage was talking with his son Asuma over tea when the bandana-wearing Chunin-sensei ran up to him. Toji Mizuki, he thought it was, but the man's words paralyzed the village leader. "Hokage-sama, it's Naruto," he gasped out, and Mizuki was a good actor. Orochimaru's spy had contacted him about getting hold of the scroll, and felt that the demon brat would be a bonus. So that was his motivation. He'd stolen the forbidden scroll of seals. The chaos that ensued was immense, and as Hiruzen gave orders, he was already in motion, heading for his office, giving the final instruction that Naruto was to captured alive and unharmed, instructions he'd felt bore repeating. He stepped into his office and closed the door. "It took you long enough to get here, Jiji-sama," said Naruto, startling Hiruzen for a few more years off his lifespan. The old man was sure. "I got bored, so I figured I'd do a little reading while I waited." As the Sandaime Hokage turned, he was greeted by the sight of Naruto sitting in his chair, behind his desk, with the forbidden scroll of seals, the village's repository of kenjutsu, open before him. As Hiruzen's eyes widened, he noticed something else, something that only long experience had enabled him to spot. "You're not the real Naruto, are you?" he asked, although it was more a statement to confirm what he already knew. "Now," the Naruto lookalike behind the desk agreed. "My original felt he could learn a technique better here in your office than shivering in a shack out in the forest. But he didn't have time to learn more than one jutsu before Mizuki-sensei was supposed to meet with him. So he put the scroll on his back, used the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, swapped the scrolls and left for the meeting, with me guarding the real scroll. Not that anyone bothered checking on it, and I got bored waiting so I started reading. Although I had to look up about chakra nature and affinities, and I still don't understand it properly. Oh, and I was supposed to bring you up to date on why this is happening from my originals, end of the matter." Iruka reached the shack to find Naruto sitting there, the scroll on his back watching the forest. Seconds before the Chunin had gotten there, the shadow clone in the Hokage's office had dispersed itself, returning all the knowledge it had gathered to him, including the Hokage's approval for his little trap. But he could smell Mizuki approaching and hear the man moving through the shrubbery, and didn't have time to explain. He quickly gestured to his sensei for silence, and waved for him to hide himself, his eyes pleading silently for the Chunin's trust. Yumino Iruka liked the blonde boy, and thought he had huge potential as a shinobi, Kage-level potential, in fact. While all his fellow teachers scoffed at the thought of the boy reaching that level, Iruka believed he could really do it, and wanted to help. When the word had gone out on the theft, he had immediately started out after the boy, hoping to convince him not to follow this path, and now he'd found him only to find that something was definitely out of place. Trusting the boy, he hid himself in a nearby tree as his fellow teacher arrived, and he remembered that Mizuki was supposed to have been the one to have discovered the theft, but how? Mizuki wasn't supposed to have access to the Hokage's office if he wasn't sent for. Iruka paid close attention to the goings-on below. "There you are, Naruto," Mizuki said as he stepped from the shadows of the trees. "How did you go? Learn any of them?" "You got here too quick, Mizuki-sensei," the 12-year-old replied. "I haven't even opened this scroll since I got here. Do you think you can give me a few tips?" The traitor smirked. Apparently the brat had had a harder time getting the scroll in the first place, and on top of that, hadn't figured out any of the jutsu, or set off any traps on the scroll itself. A pity, but surely his benefactor could get past them. "I'm sorry, Naruto, but that was your last chance," he sneered. "After all, you have two options: hand over the scroll and come with me, or be executed for betraying the village as you should have been 12 years ago." Above them, Iruka almost sprang out of the tree, but hesitated at the look on Naruto's face. It was the very picture of confusion, but it was only a picture. It didn't go any deeper than the surface. The Chunin tensed, ready to act, but continued to wait. "I don't understand," the boy said. "Why should I have been killed back then? As Mizuki drew breath to answer, and as Iruka prepared to attack to stop him, Naruto looked Mizuki square in the eye and spoke before he could. Don't you realize that would release the Kyuubi from its prison? Stunned, both Chunin, the loyal and the renegade alike, froze, even as Naruto lifted the scroll from his back with one hand and slammed it, on end, into the ground beside him, striking a formidable-looking pose for one so young, determination writ large in every inch of him. I know about the fox sealed inside me, sensei, he stated, and Iruka knew these words were aimed, not at Mizuki, as the renegade may have assumed, but at him. I am not the Kyuubi, but its prison, its lock and its key. I stand with the will of fire, and I refuse to quit. I will never give up, I will never stop trying, and I will be Hokage. I am Uzumaki Naruto, and no one can stop me. Believe it! It had begun as a verbal cry for attention, he supposed. At the tender age of 3, he'd started telling others to believe it, partly to get them to believe in him, and partly to get himself to believe, to make it so that's how it would be. Now, it was a firm and solid commitment, an oath to complete what he set his word to. It was fierce, it was proud, and it was unshakable. Intimidated by a 12-year-old boy, Mizuki lost his temper. And who's going to stop me, brat? He roared, hauling one of his outsized shuriken from his back and hurling it at the boy. A dead child, a brat who shouldn't even exist? Give up and die. Iruka was too far away, and even by pushing his chakra through his legs for extra speed, couldn't stop the shuriken, or even intercept it. It didn't stop him trying though, and so he got a point-blank, front-row center view of Naruto blocking the shuriken's path with the forbidden scroll of seals, which then puffed out of existence like a shadow clone, leaving Naruto holding the shuriken upright like a shield, and glaring at Mizuki through the hole in the middle. Your first mistake, he told the slack-jawed renegade, was forgetting that I'd been trained, a little, by 2 of the Sannin. If there was another way to pass the Genin exam, they'd have known. Your second mistake was in thinking I wouldn't ask Hokage-sama about it when he showed up in his office, despite your instructions. The whole test would have to have him know about it, as you described it, or it couldn't be real. Naruto tossed the shuriken aside and brought his hands together into a special hand sign, the fingers of one across the other. Your third mistake was betraying the village at all. It makes me furious that you thought I would go along with it. Channeling his chakra, he called out, Tajukage Bunshin no Jutsu. And the clearing and trees were filled with what seemed to be hundreds of Naruto clones. And your last mistake was in thinking I didn't learn anything from the scroll, when all I said was I hadn't opened it since I got here. As the many clones cracked their knuckles and advanced on him, a very pale, sweat-covered Mizuki began to scream, and the screams rang out across the forest for quite some time. It was a much more subdued, as well as bruised and beaten, Mizuki who was only too happy to go peacefully with the ANBU who arrived to arrest him. And although he would survive Ibiki-sama's interrogation, even if his legs never quite healed properly, he would be stricken with panic at the sight of anything orange for the rest of his life. As Hiruzen arrived to speak with Naruto and Iruka about the events of that night, the blue-eyed Jinchuriki rubbed at his neck as the gibbering traitor was taken away. I think I went a little overboard, he remarked, as the ANBU commented on Mizuki's injuries. What did you beat him with, kid? One of them, in a monkey-style mask, queried. In response, Naruto held up his hands, and then pointed at his forehead. Damn, next time use something like a club, kid, he's got all sorts of broken bones all over. The boy waved it off. I made sure not to hit anywhere vital, he said, and turned to the Hokage, who had finished taking Iruka's report. The old man looked at the boy, and saw his parents. They were there, in his face, his stance, his very attitude that screamed at the world, here I stand. Come get some. He reached into his sleeve, and smiled as he withdrew the hitayate therein. Uzumaki Naruto, he said deliberately, with the ranking ANBU and Iruka as witnesses. Konohagaku no Sato thanks you for your service in unmasking the traitor Toji Mizuki. As this mission required you to fail your genin exam, and with the evidence before us that you are capable of such jutsu as are required, I hereby raise you to the rank of genin on my authority as Hokage. Congratulations, Naruto. He paused and then continued once Naruto had calmed down a bit. This task will be credited to you as a low-end B-rank mission, but is to be held under strictest confidence from any except your Jonin sensei and teammates. You may say you were under special orders, but not what the mission was until released to do so. Do you understand? Naruto was suddenly all business, rather than his usual self. He would probably always have problems stemming from his time as Orochimaru's captive, and as now, they would crop up as cases of extreme seriousness, beyond what anyone his age should have to endure. Hi, Hokage-sama. I understand. The dawn was breaking through the windows of his office as the prospective Jonin sensei entered with the forms to assemble their requested teams. As he looked them over, he placed his hands together in front of his face, steepling his fingers, as he gave the official version of the previous night's events to the Jonin, assembled before him. In the silence that followed, the Hokage then went on. This means that there shall be 10 teams from this year's crop of genin, and one of them will have Uzumaki Naruto. Any questions or comments? Hatake Kakashi cleared his throat. Despite my history, I would like to avoid having him on my team unless absolutely necessary, he said. I hold no grievance or grudge against the boy, he's as gutsy as they come, if a bit of a knucklehead. However, I am certain that the village council will insist that I train the Uchiha heir, and from what I've read, they get on like a house on fire. Yuhi Kurenai paused as she ran that thought through her mind. Wait, she said. Isn't that a good thing? Kakashi stared at her with that one eye of his smiling. Have you ever been in a house that's on fire, Kurenai-san? Flames, destruction, panic. I don't want to have to paint you a picture. He chuckled. I don't have enough red. The discussions were easy enough, and quickly dealt with. In some cases they were easy enough to deal with, as the teams balanced out nicely, but when it came down to it, Kurenai was less than satisfied. Lord Hokage, not to question you, but why is my request for a tracking team being turned down? She was looking at the names on her list with a pensive frown. Hiruzen glanced again at his notes. It isn't, he replied. It seemed a straightforward thing to him. Team balance and personal quirks, as well as certain traditions, were taken into account, and he'd assigned the teams as impartially as possible. Then why is Inuzuka Kiba on Team 7, instead of Team 8? His sense of smell is a key factor, as is his canine partner, she said. I also don't believe any good will come of having Hyuga Hinata on the same team as Uzumaki, either. She has a crush on him, and can barely remain conscious in his presence. The Hokage again looked over his notes. Reports from the academy place her as improving in that regard. The constant exposure to her friend seems to be improving her self-confidence by leaps and bounds. Are you saying that's a bad thing? Again, Kurenai gathered her wits and argued. When Uzumaki failed the academy test, she began. At my orders, the Hokage reminded her, lying through his teeth. Hi, Hokage-sama, she responded automatically, but struggled on with her argument. That automatically made him the dead last of this year's group, so he should be paired with the Rookie of the Year, for balance. Inuzuka Kiba should be on my tracking team, as his tracking abilities are superior to Uzumaki's. Hiruzen filled his pipe and lit it, savoring a couple of puffs of smoke as he pondered how to answer. He wondered why Kurenai was so set against the boy being in her team, and recalled her protectiveness toward the Hyuga girl. Was it as simple as that? From the observations and reports he'd received, the Inuzuka boy was interested in the Hyuga heiress, who didn't reciprocate his feelings, so her virtue was safe there. But if her interest in Naruto was returned, and with the closeness of their friendship as it was, being on the same team may well be the push that started such a romance. He grinned as he got an idea, one that even Naruto, incorrigible prankster that he was, would have loved. Give him a test then. He watched as Kurenai gaped at him. Give Naruto a task that you know Kiba can manage, or make it a contest between the two of them, with no outside assistance, not even young Kiba's partner. If Naruto performs well enough in your honest opinion, no deceiving yourself, please. It's bad enough when others do it, he stays on your team. If he loses to Kiba, he can transfer to Team 7 with my blessing. What do you say, Kakashi? The copycat ninja, Sharingan Kakashi, put away his copy of Ika Ika Paradise. Can I put 20 Ryo on Naruto? Fourth seal, pursue. Kurenai stared at Naruto's file. It was thicker than she expected, and the blonde orphan had apparently had assessments performed by Lady Senju Tsunade and her apprentice, a clanless prodigy named Shizen, apparently the niece of the Sanin's lost fiancé. Master Jiraiya had also placed a few notations and recommendations in the file as well. The veteran Kunoichi, as reluctant as she was, knew better than to set a task she knew was unfair, and was carefully flipping through the file before she and Kakashi went to meet their genin teams. The first page detailed Naruto's academic grades, which were better than others might have thought. Apparently the boy had some kind of deal with Tsunade, based on his scores. If he'd been able to nail that last jutsu, she had to admit, he'd have more than qualified for the slot on her team. Next, she looked at his tracking scores. Visual tracking was pretty good, but was hardly a patch on Hinata's, and his hearing was also sharper than she'd thought. The real trick came down to his sense of smell, and she knew no one could beat an Inuzuka in that regard. It was impossible. In truth it was, but Naruto's sense of smell at least matched Kiba's, according to the file, although it was to be noted that he didn't have as much experience as of yet. Apparently it was part of a newly emerged Kekkai Genkai. Kurenai sat up straight as the information struck home. Turning the page she continued reading, even as her face paled. This was an S-rank secret. If word got out that Uzumaki Naruto had 2 Kekkai Genkai, the village council would slap him into the CRA faster than you could think it. And that would definitely be a clan restoration act problem. The first Kekkai Genkai was the main Uzumaki bloodline, heightened vitality, longer lifespan, faster healing and sharper senses, with the potential for their special chakra to develop unusual manifestations, such as the chakra chains of Uzumaki Kushina. Kurenai had to reread that line 5 times before it sank in that her Jonin sensei as a genin had to be Naruto's mother. But then, who was the father? Was he the source of the other bloodline? Shaking her head, the Genjutsu mistress continued to read. Abducted from the hospital 3.5 years back by Orochimaru, discarded as a failure by Sane when experiment appeared to fail. Awakening of second Kekkai Genkai from assimilated transplanted tissue. Escaped and finally taught by Senju Tsunade. If someone was telling a lie, or selling a story, they would have come up with a better one than this. Sealing the file again, she put it in her personal safe, which seemed to be her fruit bowl. She stood and hurried towards the academy. If she got there after Kakashi, she'd never live it down. Naruto's entrance to the classroom that morning was a surprise in more ways than one. None of his classmates had expected him, although Hinata had prayed he would at least stop by so she could finally return his jacket, not that she wanted to. But 3 years was long enough for her to dream, and at least now she felt confident enough to. The whole thing came to a head as Kiba spotted the boy, although everyone else did too, as he was the last to arrive before Iruka-sensei. "Hey Naruto," the Inuzuka boy taunted, "I thought only those who passed were supposed to be here." In answer, Naruto pointed at his forehead. There was a gleaming Hittite there, on a dark orange band with white tips like a fox's tail, dangling down his back. He then spoke up. "Kiba, I had a special job to do for the Hokage, that needed me to seem to fail." It was the official version of what had happened that was being circulated around the village. I can't say more than that. It was perhaps predictable that Sakura leapt to her feet from her spot next to Sasuke. Ino, on the other side of the boy, joined her. In the back row, Naruto Shikamaru shook his head. That much hotness on either side, and the boys still emo? He mused as the girls opened their mouths in unison. Then again, considering how much or little they actually think it was true, Ino was a fraction better at most non-academic things than Sakura. But it was a small fraction. The two rivals for Sasuke began to screech, and Naruto slapped his hands across his ears, muffling the sound from downright painful to merely annoying. From the looks of it, they'd hit the right frequency to irritate Abirame Shino's Kikeichu colony as well. "Naruto! How dare you lie like that? If there was such a job, it would have been given to Sasuke." Hinata was seeing red, and everyone else was staring at Ino and Sakura, who they'd never have believed could be that much in sync over anything. She was actually red, not with embarrassment this time but with fury, and was gripping the edge of her desk so she wouldn't go over there, and many punishments flitted through her mind, but she couldn't settle on any one of them. Sasuke was partially in shock. This was mostly from being at ground zero of his two biggest fangirls' explosion, but partly it was from Naruto being given a task he had not. The tense atmosphere was broken by Naruto breaking into laughter. Hinata lost her grip on her temper as he clutched his side, and now Sasuke was beginning to go red with anger, before Naruto managed to stop. "Oh yeah, that was a good one," he chuckled. Looking up he called out. "You all saw and heard that, right? Heh, I think the next 3 classes in each direction heard it. Doesn't anyone else find it hilarious that Sasuke's 2 biggest fans, his 2 most ardent supporters, wanted him to fail?" There was a moment of time when everything seemed to halt as that realization worked its way across the classroom. As it reached the aforementioned fangirls, some of them smirked at Sakura and Ino for making that slip. Others glared at Naruto for pointing out the problem with their thinking, if you could call it that, and finally Ino and Sakura went white as sheets, snow-white ones, freshly laundered as they drew breath to scream again. The most unlikely event ever happened, stalling the vengeance of the pair. Sasuke chuckled. Heh, it wasn't loud, but he definitely chuckled, and he still had the remnants of a grin on his face. Heh heh, it happened again, twice more, before descending into full-blown laughter, that had Sasuke clutching at ribs that had grown and used to such effort. Naruto grinned as well, as the fangirl horde was shocked speechless. That Baka Naruto had made Sasuke laugh. For what had to be the first time in years, it was beyond belief. Eventually, even as Iruka-sensei entered the room, having caught the laughter and raised voices, Naruto stepped up beside Hinata and sat down as the Uchiha heir wiped his eyes clear of the tears laughing that hard had brought on, still chuckling now and then. He wasn't Naruto's friend, not by a long shot, but pointing out the fallacy in Ino's and Sakura's argument had definitely earned him points. Without further ado, Iruka began his announcements. First, I'd like to welcome you all to class. You may have noticed that I'm your only sensei today, and for those of you wondering why, the events surrounding that explanation have been classified an A-rank secret by the Hokage. Moving right along, we have 10 genin squads here, and we'll start by placing those of you we can. Team 1. As Iruka called out their names, the genin moved into the appropriate groups. The first 3 squads were announced in proper order by Iruka. There was, by long-standing custom, no Team 4, because nobody wanted to be part of any group marked by death. Team 5 and 6 were oddities. 5 was an all-boy squad, while 6 was all girls. Team 7 consists of Uchiha Sasuke and Sakura Haruno, with an open spot to be determined, led by Hatake Kakashi. Team 8 has a similar problem, with its set members being Abirame Shino and Hyuga Hinata, led by Yuhi Kurenai. Inuzuka Kiba and Uzumaki Naruto will be filling one or the other slot based on a Jonin Sensei determined test. Team 9 is still in circulation from last year, so next we have Team 10, Nara Shikamaru, Akimichi Tsuji and Yamanaka Ino. The lineup bothered Ino, and all the fangirls except Sakura, but there was little they could do. As for Team 10's lineup, it seemed their parents had managed to convince the Hokage that another generation of the odd yet effective trio their clans made was a good plan. Once all teams were assigned, Iruka dismissed the class, with an admonishment to be back by the end of lunch to meet their respective jonin. Naruto scratched the back of his head. I wonder what that's about. He turned to the girl who was his closest, if a little shy and awkward, friend. He'd noticed she wasn't wearing his old jacket, and was curious about why, but felt this wasn't the place to discuss it. As the other fresh genin left, most of the girls glaring at Sakura and Naruto, although for very different reasons. The 6 members of Team 7 and 8, even though 2 of them were undetermined, were unsure of what to do. With their rosters up in the air like that, it was difficult to even think of bonding as a team. It was all to the good then, when a few minutes later Yuhi Kurenai arrived with one of her friends, Kiba's older sister Hana, and her canine partners with her. I'm Yuhi Kurenai. Team 7 and 8 are to come outside with me, she announced, trying to at least be neutral in her attitude, although a touch of her true attitude seeped out regardless. Hatake Kakashi will meet us in the yard by the gate. With that brusque introduction, she turned and walked out. As they were walking outside, Naruto slipped up beside Hinata and whispered his question to her. Hinata-hime, he murmured, hoping in vain that neither of the two with the sharpest senses, Shino or Kiba, would catch what he said. You're not wearing the jacket I gave you. What's wrong? Is it too small now? I mean, it was 3 years ago, and it can have been comfortable in some places. A quick glance stolen as he rubbed the bridge of his nose with his index finger, told Hinata that Naruto, her Narukuin, was blushing. Then she remembered exactly where the jacket hugged her tightest, and she too turned red. They were outside by now, and she didn't have the time to explain, so she just held the small bag she'd brought the jacket in question in, and whispered her reply. I'll tell you later, Narukuin. Kurenai-sensei is about to speak. Indeed, they had been joined by a tall jonin with gravity-defying hair and his hataite pulled down over his left eye. Kurenai didn't comment on his, for once, punctual arrival, since she knew he'd left hours before her to get here. As the jonin in dispute, she had to take the reins here, so she stepped forward. The reason we are standing here is due to a minor dispute over which genin gets placed on Team 8, which is being set up as a tracking and reconnaissance team. As a result, the Hokage has told me to test the 2 potential genin before the final determination is made. She paused for breath, and looked over the assembled genin. Hinata, Shino, the 2 of you are free to train or speak as you wait, but we will not be leaving until your teammate, whoever he is, gets back. Team 7's Sasuke and Sakura, the same applies for you. Turning to the last 2 genin, she smirked. Kiba's experience would stand him in good stead here, she knew, but then Naruto's physical stamina would also help him. The test is as follows, she told them. Somewhere in Konoha is Tora, the cat belonging to the wife of the fire daimyo. As she said this, Hana winced, and Kakashi shook his head in pity for the genin, even as he admitted that the genjutsu mistress couldn't have come up with a better test. The 2 of you are to track him down, capture him, and return him here by sunset. The first one back gets the spot on Team 8, and the other is placed with Team 7. Before you start, a few rules: no outside assistance. This means Akamaru stays here with Hana, Kiba. To be fair, however, no shadow clones for you, Uzumaki. The difference in address wasn't something she noticed, but Hinata did. The test applies only inside the walls of Konoha, and no interference with each other will be tolerated. I have 2 friends who will be keeping an eye on you both, and they will inform me of any offenses against each other. This is Tora's scent. She held up a scrap of silk that had obviously come from a cat's bed, allowing each boy to sniff it twice. Begin. As he raced out into the village, leaping to the rooftops as he'd been taught, Naruto's mind raced. Kiba had been using his sense of smell for this for a long time, but he hadn't. If he wanted to get this, he had to think about what was going on, and according to everyone, it wasn't his strong point. He was in no way anywhere near Shikamaru, for example. Heck, he probably thought more like the cat than Shikamaru. A moment of revelation was all it took. Dashing to the first place the cat would have left his scent, Naruto began trying to recall which hotel the fire daimyo's wife used when she was here. Kiba knew he had this in the bag. He too understood the laws and customs surrounding clan symbols, and had started to worry that Hinata would never see him as a possibility for a boyfriend, and then today she hadn't been wearing Uzumaki's jacket, which he just knew meant she was starting to see things his way. As Kiba leaped and raced around, he wondered why the scent wasn't just jumping out at him as it usually did, and at the unusual lightness of his head. Oh well, surely Akamaru would let him know if he missed anything. Akamaru. But he'd left Akamaru with Hana back at the academy. Oh, this was going to bite. In the shadows, 2 figures had split up, one following Kiba, and the other watching over Naruto. In about 30 minutes it would be time for their first obstacle. The blue-eyed Jinchuriki emerged from the hotel, sniffing gently at the air by the fence as he worked his way around it, soon arriving at the point the runaway cat had walked, and began to follow the old scent. He wasn't good enough to guess how old, and as he moved on, he kept a wary eye and ear out for something. He wasn't sure what, but this seemed too easy. It was. Kiba was finally able to pick up a scent of that cat, drat nuisance, and it was less than an hour old, too. As he dashed forwards, his mind drifted towards how happy Hinata would be to have him on her team, and so he missed the slight whistling sound. The flasks of concentrated peppermint had been supplied by Hana, and the people throwing them were Kurenai's friend Mitarashi Anko, who was following Naruto, and an old Chunin squadmate by the name of Sodetora Shinsher, who Kiba never noticed until far too late. At the same time, in totally different districts of Konoha, Naruto and Kiba responded to the ambush in very different manners. Naruto had a fraction of a second to react. Whoever that was, they were fast, and reached out and snatched the flask from the air, stopping the open top with his thumb to prevent the contents from spilling on the street, and managed not to break the fragile glass bottle in his grasp. That had been close. Channeling chakra to his senses, he moved on, unaware that his whisker mark were now glowing faintly with his chakra. Kiba, totally caught by surprise as his thoughts drifted away from his surroundings, also managed, by some miracle, to catch the flask thrown at him. Unfortunately, with his mouth, and the peppermint sloshed into his mouth and throat, pretty much killing his sense of smell. Gasping and choking, the Inuzuka marked his current place, and hurried over to a nearby hose to try and rid himself of the smell of peppermint, a smell so strong that it blocked his sense of smell completely. As Naruto picked up the pace, moving more quickly once he again had the trail, sniffing every so often as he ran, he swept through an area with a vague whiff of peppermint to it. If someone was obliterating sections of Tora's trail, he reasoned without slowing, he had better move even faster. When Kiba finally got the drat taste and stench of peppermint out of his mouth and nose, he darted back to the place he'd marked, and cast about to get the scent once more. He caught Tora's scent after a few minutes, because another scent, much fresher and stronger, had overlaid it that of Naruto. A few seconds of anger had Kiba growling, until he hit on a really shinobi plan: let Naruto do the work, then swoop in and grab the cat, then beat the baka back to the academy. It was so simple, it couldn't fail, and then forcing his mind back to the now, he set off. Yes, Naruto's scent was easy to follow. Shinshir sighed, and swiftly caught up to Anko. Pretty snake, the hound is hunting the fox instead of chasing the cat, he said in a deep low voice. Orders? The special Jonin thought for a second. Leave it is a legitimate strategy even if it's not a nice one. The chase continued. The afternoon was dragging on as Naruto closed on Tora's position, some bushes in one of Konoha's many parks and gardens. As he did, he heard the faint rustle of leaves, and presumed it to be his watcher. Moving slowly forward, 1 foot at a time so as not to startle the runaway cat, he crouched and slid closer. Kiba had nearly lost Naruto a couple of times that afternoon, a frustrating experience considering the other boy wore orange for crying out loud. He'd soon picked him up again though, through a few moments sniffing around, but making up the lost ground had the Inuzuka tired and grumpy. He'd finally caught up, and he too could smell the cat in those bushes. Naruto, the baka, was cautiously approaching the cat from the windward side, letting the stupid creature, Inuzuka and cats do not get along, catch his scent. Kiba, however, had worked his way around until he was upwind of the cat, with his own scent blown away from the feline that had led them this merry chase. But if Naruto got there first, Kiba didn't stop to think, he didn't feel a need to, and he raced in to grab the cat. Tora was getting bored. He'd run away again, but there was no one chasing him to put through hell until he found these two. The first one, the one who was showing him he was there, that he was nothing to fear. He smelled odd like a fox, but not like a fox. It was confusing, and Tora was wary of confusing things like this. And vets always watch out for vets. Then there was the other one, the dog-smelling one. He was hunting, but he didn't smell nice to cats. He made Tora's whiskers itch. He'd lost track of him now, and looked around as he heard Kiba's rush begin. Instinct took over, and the cat bolted away from Kiba, straight into Naruto's arms, where the young Jinchuriki immediately cradled him to be comfortable, and placed another hand over the top to secure him as he jumped straight over Kiba as he barreled from the shrubbery with his arms outstretched, and from the tree limb he landed on. Naruto was off to a nearby roof, still cradling the now scared cat which had sunk its claws into the arm of his jacket as he raced back to the academy. Kiba was not happy, and began to chase Naruto across the rooftops, wondering how the blonde could just keep running like that. He'd been going all out all day and was barely breathing hard, by the kami, whereas Kiba was most definitely slowing down, and realized he could either keep shouting threats at the other genin, or shut up and run, but either way he couldn't catch up. He'd lost, and all he could do was take it. He snarled, partly at Naruto, but mostly at himself. His former classmate had earned this, after all, and now that Kiba thought about it, Hinata probably would prefer Naruto on her team anyway. Well, maybe she'd thank him for making the baka work for it, and if she ever changed her mind, he'd still be her friend. There was always hope, right? He didn't realize he'd spoken aloud until he heard the chuckle of the Chunin behind him. Indeed, there is always hope, Inuzuka-san, the man said as he stroked his goatee-style beard. Combined with the bald head and the Chunin vest, he looked almost villainous, but in a cool way. Hope is all there is that cannot be taken from you. It can only be cast aside, and even then, there are those who will carry it for you until needed again. I am Sode Tora Shinshir, Inuzuka-san, also called Gentleman Tiger, and I bid you good day. The deep voice and almost formal manner of speech distracted him, and the man was gone from right in front of his eyes. Hyuga Niji had arrived while Naruto and Kiba were undertaking their test, and on hearing what was going on, had reported to Hayashi and the Hyuga elders. They had taken it upon themselves to see what came of this, and sent an elder with 2 branch house bodyguards as well as Hayashi and Niji, to see that Hinata's teammate was worthy. It didn't help that the elder they sent was a close friend of the deceased Inuzuka Kujo, Kiba's father, who had been killed during the Kyuubi's attack, although not by the Kyuubi, which the Inuzuka didn't bandy about much. So as Naruto came up the road, at a slow jog, stroking Tora's fur gently as he ran to reassure the now comfortable feline, he was greeted by the sight of 6 Hyuga clan members, as well as Kurenai-sensei, Kakashi-sensei and Shino, as well as Sasuke, who was leaning behind a tree, and Sakura, who was staring dreamily at Sasuke. For such a smart girl, he thought, she can sure do some stupid things at times. He turned his gaze on Hinata, who'd clasped her hands together as she saw him, a smile brightening her face, and although the sun was setting, it was as though it had sprung back into the sky as far as he could see. Kurenai watched as Naruto jogged in, petting the cat that existed to make genin life a living hell, and shuddered, a motion that was not missed by Hinata, who had never heard tales of the cat. Niji didn't speak about things with her very often. Or at all. As the red-eyed Kunoichi nodded to Naruto, Anko appeared behind him. He ran fair, and passed the obstacles without help. He's pretty good. Shinsure says the other Gaki needs work, but he'd probably be better off as a fighter with tracking as a secondary specialty. Grinning, the woman in the trench coat, mesh and miniskirt disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Turning to Naruto, she swallowed her pride, and extended her hand. Well done, Uzumaki, and welcome to Team 8. Before Naruto could say anything, Hinata's temper finally blew, striding past her family, which surprised the Hyuga no end as she wasn't hesitating in the slightest, nor did she seem to care that others were not only present, but watching. High as she felt the urge for some popcorn, placing herself before her new sensei, she exploded into an angry rant. Kurenai-sensei, she hissed, enough venom in her words to give the Jonin Ryo pause, even as Kiba finally jogged up to the academy gates. I don't think you really mean that. I think you feel forced and badly done by to have him here, when the truth is you should be fighting to keep him. I don't know why you wanted Kiba on the team, but I do know why Naruto should be her. He has drive, determination like no one else, and you should be ashamed of yourself for treating him like the rest of the villagers. The narrow minds that can't stop blaming him for something that I'm sure he didn't choose. He helps others every chance he gets. Did you know that? He stands up for anyone who needs it, and even when he has to fight someone, he tries to help them afterwards. Sasuke nodded at that with a grunt, as he recalled their fights at the academy. He sees the bright side of everything, he works hard, and when people laugh with him, his smile could light the room. He is Uzumaki Naruto, a part of this team now. And if you insist on calling him Uzumaki, then I insist you call me Hyuga. It's about as polite. Everyone was staring at Hinata during this rant, and as it went on, Naruto had looked around for confirmation. With each point someone else nodded, although apparently only Hinata had seen the true smiles he apparently used. Sasuke had actually given a wry grin as she mentioned the part about making others laugh, at the same time as Sakura blushed. As each person nodded, Naruto's smile got wider. It was a true smile, as Hinata would have put it, not a mask to hide pain, or to keep others away, but a beacon of good feelings to be shared. As he realized this, Hinata stopped talking, and looked around, realizing exactly who she'd been speaking in front of. The shocked adults of the Hyuga, the bitter and glowering face of Niji, the placid exterior of Shino, and the general look on everyone's face that seemed to say they'd have found a wolf being mauled to death by a fluffy little rabbit to be easier to believe. She brought up the bag that had Naruto's old jacket in it, even as he murmured in a low tone, "Tell it, Hinata," and tried to hide her face behind it as she went bright red, and struggled not to faint. Kurenai felt like the world was upside down. She'd just been verbally mauled, and deservedly so, by a genin she'd had charge of for less than 6 hours. She bowed at the waist towards the two genin, and spoke clearly. "I'm very sorry, Naruto. I was too wedded to what I'd heard from others, and jumped to an unfounded conclusion." When she straightened up, she walked over to Kakashi and handed him a stack of coins. "Here's your 20 ryo, Kakashi. If you buy another Ika book with it, I'll have my new team hunt you down and burn your mask." As the two teams separated, Shino leaned in towards Naruto. "Why do you think he wears that mask?" he asked his new teammate in a level voice. Naruto thought a moment before answering, still gazing at Hinata. As much as he reads Erosenin's books, it's probably to hide his nosebleeds straightening as Hinata spoke to her father nervously. "Sorry, Shino, but can you excuse me? I just remember Hinata-chan said she needed to talk to me." With that, he made his way closer to the girl with the midnight hair. "I told you, daughter," Hayashi was saying as Naruto approached, "it was all well and good to play at it for the last few years, but if the elders are to make you a good match, for a change," he was interrupted by his child. "I am sorry, father, but time has gotten away from us. I was going to explain things but events came up to postpone the telling. If you can give me a few minutes." "A few minutes for what, Hinata-heim?" Naruto asked, startling an eep from her as she startled. This was embarrassing enough in front of her whole clan, without actually having them hear what she said. Taking his hand, she led him away from everyone, but took great care to remain in full view of them all. As she did, Naruto found himself caught up in how soft her hands were, before he realized she was speaking to him. Sorry, he muttered. "What was that you said? Do you remember the jacket you gave me, Naruto?" he snorted. Of course he remembered it. "You've only worn it every day since, Hinata," he replied. "Until today, of course. Is there something wrong? It's definitely too small now. If you want, I can get you another one?" Hinata very nearly passed out from excitement, but managed not to by the barest margin. Taking a deep breath, she continued, "Hi, Naruto-kun, it is too small, but please let me finish, okay?" At his nod she went on. "You know the spirals on the shoulder and back of your jacket?" Again he nodded. "Those are clan symbols, your clan symbols, and the only people allowed to wear them are the active duty Chunin and higher shinobi, to honor a treaty as old as Konoha itself, and the members of that clan." Naruto nodded again. He had a vague memory of Tsunade saying something along those lines, and his curiosity was piqued as Hinata began going red again. Studying it, he saw that it started at her jaw and spread upwards and down from there. A tiny part of him began to ask how far down, but the rest of his mind bludgeoned it into submission. Well, if you give someone your clan symbols like that, you're asking them to join your clan. If you give them T to an UNM married girl or W woman, C can BBT taken as a M marriage P proposal. Naruto noticed that cute stutter she used to have when she was nervous was back, meaning she had to be really nervous. He went pale, and looked over at Hayashi. Why you mean? Hi. Hi. Hinata was pushing her index fingers together now. And why your D-dad? Hi. Naruto's eyes rolled back in his head in a moment he would never live down, and he fainted. Fifth seal, engage. Naruto woke up panicking, looking around anxiously. There above him was Hinata's concerned face, and although his pillow wasn't her lap, with the other Hyuga nearby, perhaps that was just as well blasted. Struggling to hammer the piece of his mind that kept thinking that way down, unfortunately, it was as irrepressible as the rest of him, and kept getting up again. The blonde Jinchuriki gradually sat up. The pillow had been that bag Hinata had been carrying around today, and he realized where his old jacket was by the strong smell of her coming from it. Hayashi was the closest Hyuga, and oddly, much at odds with the expression on his face, seemed amused. That couldn't be right, could it? Pushing this mess from his mind, and shaking his head to clear it, Naruto cast his mind back over the conversation surreal as it was before he'd passed out. Oh please Kami, he prayed in earnest, don't let Sasuke hear about that. His prayer was already too late, of course, as Ino had been passing the academy gates on an errand at exactly the right time to pick up that choice piece of gossip. He turned to Hinata, who was wearing a worried look on her face. It's all right, Hinata-heim, he said, a sheepish smile on his face. I think it was just the shock of all that news at once. Sorry for worrying you, the pearl-eyed Kunoichi smiled. Are you sure you're all right, Naruto-kun? She asked. It wouldn't do to find he'd been badly hurt later, that would be awful. When he nodded, she let out a sigh of relief. Now she could keep speaking with him, although her father was close enough to hear. It had to be done, and hadn't she just chewed out her own sensei in front of this group and both teams? She could, and would, do this. Naruto-kun, she began slowly, certain that he hadn't known about the symbols and consequences. While I like the idea that you really wanted me to be part of your clan, your family, I knew why you didn't fully understand what you were offering. As a child I could play at it, and your old jacket was a source of comfort and strength for me. But now, the clan is looking to strengthen itself, and as such I have to do my part as much as I wish otherwise. I must return your jacket. She was moments from tears. They were already gathering in her eyes, ready to pour down her cheeks. Then she felt a gentle finger brush across her right eye, then her left, softly brushing away the impending torrent. Startled, she looked up, staring into the depths of the most sapphire blue eyes she had ever seen, even as Naruto spoke softly, fully aware that Hyuga Hayashi, Hinata's father and therefore not a man to cross if he could avoid it, was listening to every word. So the jacket's too small, then, he said, in a matter-of-fact tone, as if he were discussing the weather, or the crops. There was a light, a spark, deep within those eyes that she had only seen there before when he was discussing ramen from Ichiraku's. I'll just have to get you one that fits then. Her gasp of surprise was shocked from her, as she brought her hands up to cover her mouth, as she blushed. Surely, he didn't mean, but Naruto-kun, now that you know, she began, only for him to cut her off. Yeah, I know, he said low but firm. I didn't then, but I do now. And if I had known, maybe I'd like to think I'd have done it anyway. But back then you were just the nice girl who never hurt me. A little place in the sun, even in the darkest reaches of my mind. The image of the sewer-like construction where the Kyuubi was imprisoned came to his mind's eye, replete with the odd, incongruous ray of sunshine. So now I know, and I'm still offering. But if the very thought hurt him, but although he didn't know much about love, he was only 12 after all, he knew that having something that hurt him was preferable to something that hurt her. The clearing of Hayashi's throat reminded them that they were not alone. Boy, the head of the Hyuga nearly growled. His voice was that deep and low, rumbling with menace. What makes you think I or my clan would in any way permit this farce? It was phrased as a question, but it had all the hallmarks of a threat, and Naruto didn't respond well to threats. Snapping his eyes to meet those of Hinata's father, he glared, refusing to back down despite the heavy dose of fear trying to climb his spine. Naruto drew on his knowledge, from what he could remember, of what he'd learned involving his mother and her clan. It had been tiny tidbits, gradually gathered over the years and pieced together bit by bit. If his past was a jigsaw puzzle, it was one of those big ones, and he had more than a few large patches of picture, as well as the edges. There were other sections, involving his father, but he couldn't figure out where they fit, exactly, so he left them out of the picture as he worked. And now he brought it to bear. My name, he stated. Uzumaki, part of a treaty as old as the village. Hinata had told him that herself, before he passed out. The Kekkai Genkai of that clan, which grants sharp, clear senses and unmatched vitality. That information had come courtesy of Tsunade and her tales of his mother, as well as comments that compared him to her. A heart and will that will not quit, that will never surrender. A mind and soul that will always overcome. No matter how many times I fall, I will rise again. I will be Hokage someday, believe it! And then there's this. He moved his arm so that his hand was between him and Hayashi, blocking the view of any other than the head of the Hyuga clan and his teammates and sensei. His claws slowly extended, and the eyes of those who could see it widened. Another Kekkei Genkai, I was informed. It emerged during my absence from Konoha. I was abducted, and experimented on, by a man with snake's eyes, and nearly died there. I still have nightmares. Hayashi looked at the boy with his Byakugan active, assessing the odd alloy that seemed to make up his very bones. Hinata suddenly recalled the dietary supplements Naruto had taken before every meal she'd ever seen him eat since his return, 4 dull gray pills that obviously didn't taste very good. Shino and Kurenai were speechless, although for the Aburame boy, it would have been hard to notice. So, Hayashi-sama, said Naruto, all serious now, a far cry from the troublemaker and prankster that he heard of, equally far from the only other real concern that he had. Is that enough to satisfy your clan? 2 Kekkei Genkai and the Uzumaki name? Or are they going to be greedy? Hayashi grimaced inwardly, but his nigh-legendary reserve kept the expression from his face. For my clan, it might be. I don't particularly care. If Hinata chooses to accept, she will be removed from her position as heiress. The matriarch of one clan cannot be the head of another. Her place will be filled by Hanabi, and those symbols may be the only thing that can keep both my daughters unsealed until I can mend the clan. Naruto was bothered somewhat by that statement. Unsealed? He asked. Without his noticing, his hand crept across his belly, a gesture that neither Hayashi nor Hinata missed, although they forbore to comment. What do you mean unsealed? The Hyuga head glared at the boy, then waved Niji forward. Show him the seal, he ordered. Niji glared at Naruto as he removed his hitayate, and the silk band beneath it. Hayashi continued. The Byakugan is a potent tool and a great advantage for Konoha, he explained. As such, it was decided that the Hyuga who were to become shinobi would receive a seal that would preserve it against our enemies. That is the origin of the branch house. Somewhere along the way, the branch house became the servants of the main house, and the seal was altered. This seal can be used to inflict pain, as well as sealing away the Byakugan at the moment of death. He waved for Niji to return, and as the boy stepped back, he again glared at Naruto. Hinata was returning his glare, not that he seemed to care. With Naruto knowing the connotations, he still offered her his jacket, a dream come true for her. She'd already pinched herself several times to see if she'd been placed in a genjutsu, and she was not going to let her Naruto down. Naruto, for his part, was locked in thought for a good few minutes. He could see a few problems with what he'd been told. Hayashi-sama, he asked, could you correct me if I'm wrong, but if the seal activates at the Hyuga's death, and it's known to do so, what stops the enemy from removing their eyes while they're alive? He shivered at the thought. As for the seal, maybe it would take a master a few ninjutsu to remove, but surely it wouldn't be so hard for an enemy to find the key to cause the pain. Wouldn't that very crippling lead to more live captures, and thus a greater risk of the loss of the Byakugan? Hayashi was impressed. In a matter of seconds this boy had seen a major flaw in their perfect seal, one that was now revealed as nothing more than a means to subjugate the branch house. That could give him an excuse. This boy might just enable him to heal his sundered clan, and that was a priceless prize. Very well, Uzumaki-sama, he said, the formal mode of address startling Naruto and Hinata. She may wear your symbols, and I shall contact you at a later point to arrange the blessed event. Your enemies will be mine, and my family yours. The Hyuga head then shocked the elder behind him, as well as Niji, by bowing to Naruto, touching his forehead to the ground, before rising to leave. For a moment he paused, and softly spoke. My daughter, Hinami would have been proud of you, as am I. Shino had a lot to think about that night, as Kurenai had told them to be ready at 8 the next morning at Training Ground 8. He spent the time as he walked home quietly pondering what was happening with Naruto. Hinata wearing her classmate's jacket had been a running joke for the past few years, and a few unkind children had been known to joke that she'd still be wearing it at her wedding. Civilian clans didn't adhere to the same customs as shinobi clans, such as the impact of offering your clan's symbols, so their lack of understanding was explicable, if crass. He reached the Aburame compound, where his mother sat on the decking at the side of the house staring out at his father as he and his Kikeichu colony trained together. Shino took note of the economy of motion, the precision he used, with little if any wasted effort, and idly wondered if he'd be that good someday. Then he remembered Hinata's rant at Kurenai-sensei and smiled a little, the expression concealed by the high collar of his coat. He would. Oh? Came his mother's voice, and he realized she was even closer than he thought, having moved in while he was distracted by his own thoughts. A smile on Shino-kun's face? Something big has happened then, something positive I know. Today you were assigned to your team, and the matchups are something you consider near perfect. Happy with her deduction, Aburame Hataru waited for her son's response. The Aburame, like many other clans, strove for perfection, but with what Shino had witnessed today, he had come to a different conclusion. Perfection seems overrated, he murmured, causing his mother's eyes to widen and his father to halt his training session. The raised eyebrow of Aburame Shibi invited his son to explain. Perfection itself is an end to strive for, but never attain, making the goal worthless, and the striving itself the key. Upon attaining perfection, you stop growing and stagnate. Once you stagnate, others surpass you. Rather than strive for something that becomes worthless once I attain it, I would strive instead for the strength to protect my friends and teammates, so that my goal and my striving both have a worthy purpose. Hataru was certain it was the most that Shino had said in one go since he was 6, and the thoughtful look on her husband's face told her he was pondering Shino's words deeply. After a moment he nodded. "You're right," he said, and the quiet family watched the fireflies his mother was named for come out to dance. Naruto would not hear of Hinata going home after they'd been dismissed before he could get her a new jacket, one he insisted would be of the right size, and so he took her to the store where he got most of his clothes. Kujaku Dansei was a tailor with a small clientele, and he'd long ago been quietly instructed by the Hokage to make sure that Naruto always had the clothes he wanted. The old man still remembered the day the boy had seen his first picture of a tiger, and the amazement on the boy's face when he was told that few people saw the tiger that was hunting until too late. He had no tiger skins, and the tiger stripe pattern would have been out of place on the boy anyway, but he came up with the basic outfit that Naruto had worn for years. Dansei was a former shinobi, too old now to run as he used to, and had turned to his hobby to make a living. He was good at it, and when his granddaughter had chosen to apprentice to him for those skills, rather than as a shinobi, he'd been proud. Now that same granddaughter was helping him with the measurements of Hyuga Hinata, and Naruto was asking the man's opinions. The symbols had to be there, of course, on the shoulder and back, and Dansei knew what that meant, politically speaking at least. He made the garb for ninja-grade durability, yet cut it for comfort, and as young Zuzushi, Zuzu-chan to friends and family, called out the alterations, he marked them on the jacket. His skill was such that mere minutes after the measuring was done, almost before Hinata had dressed and returned with Zuzu-chan, Dansei's little masterpiece was complete. It was nearly identical to the old jacket, but with a feminine cut to accent the waist and shoulders, and a little inbuilt support for robust activity. The blue of the old jacket had clashed somewhat with the midnight hair, but by shifting a shade or three closer to purple, that section instead added to it in a way defying description. The orange was a little darker than his jacket, too, but not so much that Hinata's fair skin became pallid. Rather, it gave her a healthy-looking glow, although that may have been the girl's joy at being told she could wear the symbols, even with Naruto knowing what it meant. The moment he'd said he'd understand if she didn't want him, her heart had almost shattered, until she realized he was giving the choice to her, in case she didn't want him. As if that would happen. Her new jacket drew much attention that night at dinner, and her father's lack of comment told the clan he at least approved, though there were soft mutters all night, spiteful, hate-filled things. As the meal drew to a close, Hayashi raised a hand for attention. "Today, I approve the match between Clan Uzumaki and Clan Hyuga, that has been in negotiation for the past few years." The noise as elders bolted upright and began to shout in protest, or to demand the girl be sealed before she was wedded, was as nothing to the cold, ice-filled tone that the head of the clan wielded as they bickered. "Enough," he hissed, and silence fell. Glaring about the table, his eyes were everywhere but on his rapidly reddening daughter. Hanabi looked puzzled, and Niji had that cold look of disdain on his face. "Are we the strongest clan in Konoha, or a posturing schoolyard mob?" As the elders forced themselves to self-control, he went on. "Further, due to drawbacks in the caged bird seal, I have elected to discontinue the practice." Hayashi took advantage of the apoplectic silence that ensued, even as that odious elder from earlier that day tried to squawk as he rapidly turned purple. "It was pointed out to me that the seal only triggers on death, so should any of our enemies take it in their heads to harvest the eyes while their donor is alive, it would not seal them. Further, the seal's key for inflicting pain is far easier for a Fuinjutsu wielder to determine than the removal, so an enemy with sufficient skill, of which there are many, can pose a significant threat in battle with a single hand seal and the right amount of chakra. I am certain no one here wants that." He pointed to the Hyuga seal master, an old man called Kenshoku. "Begin at once," he ordered, before any could countermand him. "By the end of the week, I want no Hyuga in Konoha vulnerable to an enemy with that key." As he sat, he smiled behind the mask of his own face. That should keep their minds off the whole question of Hinata. He didn't miss that the Hyuga who'd protested loudest were also the ones most fond of using the seal to enforce compliance, either. Even a startled, almost shocked Niji, his usually stoic face a confused mess of emotions, couldn't avoid the thought. All this, because of one little jacket? Naruto couldn't sleep. The events of the day and the previous night had him wired, almost literally bouncing with energy, and so he sat at the beat-up old desk in his apartment, and wrote a letter to Tsunade, telling her of the events. He realized he might not be allowed to send it, or not all of it, so he took it to the Hokage Tower to see if he could get Jiji-sama to look it over. Maybe she could help him out too. After all, she'd known his mother. Hiruzen skimmed through the reports from the various jonin who had been chosen to sponsor the genin graduates this year. Again, as he'd suspected, from the 10 squads he'd assembled, only 3 were ready for the duty and burden of shinobi status. That was appalling. From past years that he'd investigated, at Jiraiya's urging, he knew that prior to the Kyuubi's attack, the academy had been producing twice as many able squads, so where did the competence go? Was the sabotage deliberate, or just coincidental? Removing the civilian side of the village council was not the answer, as the exact same makeup of the council during the Yandame's reign was effective. So was it the people involved that caused this disaster? Wasn't a strong enough word, but it would have to do, or were they, too, being manipulated by some dire puppet master? He picked up the reports for teams 5 and 6. They were capable enough, but their teamwork was fragile. They would require another year to temper their teams at the academy, but with Mizuki gone, who would teach them? Sighing, he scanned Team 7's report. Pass. That was all Kakashi had written, but it was enough. He was using the bell test that Minato had used on him, that had been used on him by Jiraiya, that had been used on him by Hiruzen himself. In the comments were the words "post not needed." That was a first. Every team had one member who wound up tied to the post, in the second stage. For it to be unnecessary implied that the test was complete before it got that far. The Hokage chalked it up to the Inuzuka boys' pack instincts. Once those kicked in, there would have been little hope of failing them, as his example would inspire the Uchiha, which left the Haruno girl stepping in, unlikely to abandon her crush. He could almost see it in his mind. Kakashi must have been impressed. This was the first team he'd ever passed. Team 8 was a foregone conclusion. Kurenai's report was more detailed than Kakashi's, but finding her recon and tracking team had taken the initiative to map the unfamiliar training ground before she arrived as a teamwork exercise. That was very good indeed. Team 10 was passed, if barely. Hiruzen sighed at the terse notes. His son was a little lackluster, a little unfocused, for what he was doing. Perhaps a Chunin assistant would light a fire under him. He reached into one of his drawers and took out a file. There was this Chunin, who'd applied for advancement to Jonin. Assigning the youngest of Konoha's 4 gentlemen to the task was a great test for the rank. That also gave him an idea about the academy problems. He scrawled out the message to assign Sodetora Shinshiro to assist Saratobi-sama, and 2 others to send to the other gentlemen to see what they could do with the academy. Sometimes the best thing to do with a problem was to throw it at another. Naruto's shinobi identification photo had just been taken and he wandered down the tower to his appointment with the Hokage regarding his clan finances. A little investigation told him that even from just his mother's clan, he had more than enough for his own compound, not unlike the Hyuga. But he didn't want something that big unless there was no other choice. As he entered the room, he saw the Hokage was not alone, but he hadn't expected him to be. Hyuga Hayashi was present as an interested party, having agreed to Hinata's engagement to the young Uzumaki, and Kurenai was present as his sensei, and thus de facto advisor. The other 3, though, he couldn't understand. This was starting to smell serious. Choosing a sturdy chair, Naruto bowed to the Hokage, his sensei and his prospective father-in-law, but didn't sit. Hokage-sama, he said instead, I can understand my sensei's presence, and that of Hyuga-san, but I am unfamiliar with these others. Am I permitted to ask why they are present? A meeting now concluded, so that we may get on with my clan's business? Hiruzen openly smiled at the boy's formal and precise words. To think Naruto, the village troublemaker, christened by the ANBU who'd been on the receiving end of his pranks until the abduction as the village Pitta, or pain in the A acronym, had this inside of him. Ignoring the glares that the advisors from the council were leveling at the boy, the Hokage answered Naruto by introducing them. These are Shimura Danzu, Mitokado Hamura, and Yudatane Koharu, advisors from the village council, Naruto-san, he said, establishing protocols by the address during the introductions. Naruto turned and bowed to them, not as low as he had to Hayashi or Kurenai, whom he'd honored nearly as much as the Hokage. It is an honor to meet them, the blue-eyed shinobi said. I have heard so much of them already. He smiled, a false one that didn't fool anyone, nor was it meant to. I do hope your meeting with Hokage-sama was fruitful. Inwardly, Hiruzen wished he could break the reserve and laugh at Danza being played like a top by this boy, barely a sixth of his age. They are here for your meeting, Naruto-san, he gently corrected, playing along. The council seems to feel their advice will be needed. Why? Naruto asked. I can see Hyuga-san's interest in the matter as my future father-in-law. He still swallowed hard at that. He just couldn't wrap his mind around the thought. And Kurenai-sensei is here to give advice. While we got off to a rocky start, I trust her to look out for me, and for Hinata-chan. But what exactly does private Uzumaki business have to do with the council? There is a matter of a loan that must be repaid, Hamura said after Danza looked in that direction. The village finances are very important. Naruto may have been a knucklehead, but he was not a fool. That sentence had been carefully constructed to make it sound like Uzumaki owed the village. I offer you a deal, Mitokado-san, he said. The interest on the loan gets paid on time, and brought up to date, and I don't call in the debt. The elders stared at the boy, wondering exactly how much he knew. As they did, Hamura cleared his throat, nervously. I agree, he said. There was nothing else to say, having backed himself into a corner. The glare he directed at Naruto did not seem to faze the boy, who then turned to the Hokage. Was that all they needed to know, Hokage-sama? As Hiruzen nodded, the boy again turned towards the village advisors. I am so pleased to have been of assistance to the honored elders, and thank you for dealing with this promptly. Now there are more personal matters to deal with, boring trivialities and clan contracts to finalize, so I beg, do not let us keep you from more important issues. As the elder advisors left, reluctantly but they did leave, Naruto held a bow at the exact degree that gave them just enough respect that they couldn't call him on it, but not enough that they would think he actually respected them. Once the door was closed, he nearly collapsed in the chair. Do we have to be formal for the rest of this? He asked the Hokage. My face feels like it's going to fall off from the fake smiles. Chuckling, Hiruzen shook his head, and the small group began to discuss the future of the Uzumaki clan and its past. Sixth seal, retaliate. The meeting was almost over. Naruto had found that being the heir to the Uzumaki clan presented him with a couple of properties within Konoha, one of which was ironically the very apartment building he'd been living in all this time. Hiruzen had simply set things up so the rent paid by the few other tenants went directly into a stipend for him, keeping him in groceries and other essentials for quite some time now. Of course, finding he'd been overcharged in those places that did sell to him, with a few exceptions such as Kajaka clothing and Yanagi blacksmithing, leaving the boy to live off ramen, was unforgivable, especially since he needed a good diet to help his bones form properly now, even with the supplements Tsunade had supplied him. They could be prosecuted as sabotaging a ninja candidate of the village if Naruto revealed his Kekkei Genkai. Of course, then the easily manipulated council would slap him into the CRA. He didn't want that. He hadn't even kissed Hinata yet, realizing that the girl in question's father was right there. A few seconds after having said this, froze Naruto on the spot, a nervous grin on his face, as Hayashi raised one eyebrow. Hayashi knew it was going to happen eventually, and was resigned. This was the way things were going, and he planned to step down as clan head as soon as Hanabi was ready for the position. He didn't feel right, even after abolishing the caged bird seal, as he himself had used it before, and against his own brother. His announcement to that effect had not been well received by the elders or the branch house, but he was adamant. The only person to lead the clan had to be one who had never used the seal. Returning his regard to Naruto, he let the boy squirm for a bit before speaking. Then you had best do so, hadn't you? He pinned Naruto with his gaze. You will tell her about your prisoner, of course. There will be no deceiving her there, and I doubt she will mistake the container for the contained. The date we shall set once you both reach Chunin rank, but I do not wish to be a grandfather for many years. Do you understand me? The red that had washed over Naruto added a counterpoint to his nervous confirmation. Then our business has concluded. Hayashi's departure was cordial and informal, and Kurenai left shortly after, informing Naruto that tomorrow afternoon would be their first mission, a D rank, which was all they could receive until they'd accomplished a certain number of them. But training would occur in the morning, this time at Training Ground 37. Naruto himself was about to depart when the doors slammed open and a short boy around 8 years old in gray shorts and a blue leaf emblem t-shirt, wearing a scarf and a skullcap, charged at the Hokage with a kunai. He didn't get there, luckily, tripping over his own scarf and tumbling over himself. If Naruto hadn't snatched away the boy's kunai as he fell, he might have removed his own pancreas. Springing to his feet, the boy looked around and pointed dramatically at Naruto. The whole attitude, combined with the sheer level of energy the boy seemed to have, reminded Naruto of someone he knew well. Now if he could just remember who. It was you, wasn't it? The boy demanded. You tripped me and intercepted my assassination technique. You're good. Naruto tilted his head to one side in amazement at the wrong conclusions this child was leaping to. As if, he retorted, letting his normal self emerge. 2 hours discussing the history, finances and politics involved with the Uzumaki name was more than long enough to be serious, he felt. You tripped over your own scarf, kid. From the lofty perch of 4 years older, Naruto was starting to enjoy this. So why were you attacking Jiji-sama? The boy blinked at him. Is he your Aji too, then? But I don't have any cousins, Hiruzen sighed. Naruto, this is my grandson, Sarutobi Konohamaru. Kono-kun, this is Uzumaki Naruto. I believe you two share a goal. Naruto nodded, picking up the way the conversation was going. So you want to be Hokage too, then? Look, I know Hokage-sama here isn't my grandfather, but for a long time he was the only one who seemed to care about me. So I call him Jiji-sama. It says I think of him as family, but still shows respect, get it? Konohamaru nodded, he did indeed get it. But if you want to be Hokage, why are you attacking him? Because the Hokage is the strongest, and if I can beat him, I have to be the strongest, right? Konohamaru seemed uncertain. That is true, came a prissy voice from the door. A tall, thin man dressed in the standard Jonin garb, with a bandana covering his hair and a pair of dark glasses that he pushed back up his nose, stood there. Honorable grandson, you really shouldn't run off like that. How are you going to get strong enough to become Hokage quickly if you don't follow my teachings? Before the younger boy could answer, Naruto planted himself in front of the strange Jonin, glaring. Isn't it rude to break into a private conversation without introducing yourself? He asked. The stranger glanced at Naruto, assessing him quickly as his eyes traveled swiftly up and down the Genin, and just as swiftly dismissed him. In a haughty tone, he spoke, introducing himself as if bestowing a favor that Naruto was in no way worthy of. I am called Ebisu, an elite Jonin tutor for the honorable grandson of the honorable Sandaime Hokage. Naruto tilted his head one way, and then the other, with a sniff of the air between. When you put it that way, he said, noticing the disdain this man was treating him with, obviously judging him by the demon he was said to be. You do realize that those words actually tell me absolutely nothing, don't you? Naruto's next words cemented him a place as one of Konohamaru's favorite people ever. There's no honorable whoever here. There's Jiji-sama, and as Kono-kun he paused as he looked over his shoulder at the younger boy. I can call you that, right, Ototo? At Konohamaru's awestruck nod, he turned back to the Jonin. This is how you introduce yourself, and I should know. I was taught my manners by Senju Tsunade, and when Tsunade-sama teaches you manners, they stick. He drew himself up and bowed, just a fraction, keeping his eyes on Ebisu. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, head of that clan and genin ninja of Konohagakure no Sato. Relaxing a little, he stood upright and glared at the jonin again. Now what do you mean become Hokage quickly? Kono-kun has to do it the hard way, just like all the others did. There's no quick path to Hokage. Konohamaru stared at the older boy. What? No quick path? But then what am I supposed to do? How do you become Hokage then? Naruto turned to face his new friend. Like I said, the hard way? Being Hokage is no easy thing, just ask Jiji-sama. It's mostly hard, dirty, thankless work. You have to know that going in, and it takes the strongest people to shoulder that. Naruto paused. I don't really know why anyone else chose to become Hokage, but I know why I will. There are people who are precious to me, and others who are precious to them, and others precious to them. It goes on from that. If you become Hokage for any reason other than to protect them, all of them, the ones you know and the ones you don't, the ones you love and the ones you can't stand well, then, you're chasing the wrong hat. He grinned at the obviously angry jonin. And if anyone says different, they're selling manure as chocolate. Having other things to do, Naruto strode from the Hokage's office after saying his goodbyes to Konohamaru and Hiruzen. Upon leaving the Hokage tower, he made his way to his second property, a modest house and garden compound bordering the Hyuga estate. It was a decent house, in a similar style to the Hyugas, just smaller. It was dusty, not having seen any use in a long time, but a few dozen Kagebunshin with brooms and mops and cleaning rags soon had the place looking brand new. There was easily enough room for a large family, with several rooms suitable as bedrooms, as well as an office, a good-sized kitchen, a laundry and a very comfortable bathroom, with a tub that was more than large enough for two. Blushing as that thought ran through his mind, and once more striving to ignore that part of him that kept trying to bring up the subject, he made another pass through the house, measuring for furniture at a later point. Maybe he should ask Hinata for help there, since she'd be living here in a few years, maybe less if they made Chunin early. Shaking his head to clear out the thoughts that brought to mind, Naruto left the compound to return home. He was watching the stars, and his mind drifted a bit, considering the future as a pleasant thing, and he missed the signs of an ambush until it was almost too late. Perhaps it was the reddish glow over the other buildings and the smoke pouring into the sky, dulling his senses with shock as he realized that was his home on fire. The scent of the first rushing assailant was heavily laden with sake, and he obviously thought a 12-year-old demon brat to be an easy target. Naruto heard him at the last second, and began to turn as the shovel haft was laid across what should have been the side of his head, but was actually the back of his skull, with crushing force. Not even the new material of his bones altered the laws of physics, and the power behind the blow cartwheeled Naruto to one side, although not as far as otherwise would have been the case, blood flying from the wound in his scalp, even as the shovel broke, the loud crack resounding through the night. There was a pause as the attackers stared through their drunken haze at the broken shovel, then raised their improvised arsenal and closed in. It surprised them to find Naruto already on his feet, the wound across his head from the broken shovel closing and sealing already, healing before their very eyes, which gave them pause. The blue-eyed genin poured his chakra into the jutsu he'd worked hard to learn that night when he'd taken down Mizuki, screaming out Tajukage Bunshin no Jutsu. As he did, he used more than enough, and didn't notice, or brushed off as imagined, the fact that his whisker marks glowed blue with his chakra as he did, a small army of shadow clones appearing to trap the mob. By the time the ANBU squad arrived, it was all over. A dozen grown men were trussed up like chickens, awaiting their fate, and Naruto sat against the nearby fence, staring at the smoldering remains of his home. It hadn't been much, but it had been his, and someone had egged on this band of drunks to take it away. He wondered why it didn't hurt more, why it wasn't sinking in that it was all gone. Maybe he needed somewhere he felt safe for that, but he couldn't imagine where. Then her scent hit him. Hinata. She was here, and he began looking around to find her. She was there, standing in her sleeping kimono, having taken the time to throw her new jacket on over the top, with a handful of other Hyuga including her father, and she saw him at the same time, rushing to him and clutching him close. He could feel it now. Here, he was safe. Here, he could let it all go. Here, in her arms, he could weep for what he had lost in his life, not just his home, but his childhood, and he would be safe here though a war raged close around them. As she held the sobbing form of her intended close, noting he was a fair bit heavier than he looked, Hinata stared at what had been his apartment. She felt Naruto's sobs slow, and descend into a fitful slumber, one that smoothed out as he snuggled closer to her. There in that apartment, he'd lost most of what he owned. She knew he kept Gamachan, his green frog wallet, on his person at all times, but everything else, including the gifts she'd secretly left for him over the years, had been in that building. As a hand closed on her shoulder, she looked up into the stern and foreboding features of her father's face. For tonight, he said, sympathy in his low-pitched voice, but not his face. He comes home with us. He was warm. That was the first thing he noticed. He was warm and safe, and he realized he was not alone. Opening his eyes revealed to him a humble bedroom in pale colors, with a few exceptions. The first was the old orange jacket that was pressed behind glass and framed, like some oversized flower. The second was a pile of neatly folded clothes on the desk, freshly laundered, that looked like his. Finally there was the last, a stuffed toy that looked handmade, a chibi fox plushie, but one that had been modified with spiky blonde hair on its head. It looked a little out of place, and Naruto at first didn't realize why. When he went to rise and he discovered the arms around him, he realized pretty quickly that the space normally occupied by the soft toy was currently occupied by him, and the warm, tight embrace that didn't want to let go of him was Hinata. He was so dead when Hayashi-sama found out what was happening. He spotted movement in the doorway, and feigned sleep. Through the cracks of his eyelids he saw a Hyuga girl, no more than 8 years of age, peering through the open door with a shy and puzzled look on her face before turning to someone else, in the corridor beyond his line of sight, and asking the burning question, "Nisan, who is Nei-chan's new plushie?" Naruto immediately realized that this must be Hinata's sister, and wished he made a better introduction than as her cuddle toy. An instant later he spotted her form of address, and a few thoughts ran through his head. I didn't think Hinata had a brother, he thought, his mind both racing, and yet striving to prolong this happy place. He hadn't had the nightmares, neither the old one or the new one. He could never remember. Then he remembered the Hyuga boy who'd made genin the previous year, her cousin, he thought, who had often spoken up when it was time to go home, who the shy girl, a squeeze from the arms now holding her against his back reminded him that she wasn't so shy anymore, had referred to as Nisan. Wasn't Niji always angry at everything and going on about fate? As the boy stepped up to the doorway, he spotted Naruto. A grim smile reached his face. No one to worry about, Hanabi-sama, he said grimly as he stepped into the room, since he's going to be dead soon. The blonde Jinchuriki stiffened in fright, and was about to leap up and run away, when the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard came from behind him. Hinata's somewhat sleepy voice. "Niji and I-san, stop it," she said. "Two-san knows where Naruto is." The arms reluctantly let go of him, and the sheets moved as Hinata sat up. "His home was burned down last night, and we had to bring him here. He was asleep, and wouldn't let go of me, so Two-san left him here. But there was supposed to be someone to chaperone us." Another Hyuga, one of the ones from the previous night going by Naruto's sense of smell, arrived in the corridor. "I'm sorry, Hinata-sama," she said, bowing. "I had to answer a call of nature." As Hinata wasn't holding him anymore, Naruto figured this to be as good a time as any to wake up, and began to go through the motions of it, but that didn't last long against the Hyuga eye for details. Hanabi giggled at his attempt to mislead them. This Naruto had to be the Naruto her Nei-chan had always spoken of, and that meant he was this Uzumaki father had accepted for her at dinner the other night. Unless there was some other Uzumaki in the village somewhere, which she doubted. "Don't bother pretending," she said, with a Hyuga-style grin, the corners of her mouth barely quirking upwards. "I've known you were awake since I saw you. I'm sorry to hear about your home. If there's anything I can do to help." Hanabi's sincere gesture was a big step up from how others had always treated him, and Naruto wasn't entirely sure how to deal with it. A moment's thought, and a rumble from his belly, distracted him. "Breakfast is in 5 minutes, Niji said, confused as to why this boy was held in such high regard by his uncle. He was trying to find something stable in his constantly changing world, and somehow the immutable rock of fate had turned out to be a pile of sand. From what little he could find out, this boy was the center of the spiraling maelstrom that life had become, and he couldn't wrap his mind around that. How could this boy, a year younger than he, cause such chaos? Naruto nodded and sat up, abandoning all pretense that he hadn't been awake. With Hinata's words, he'd remembered last night's events, and the safety he felt in Hinata's arms. Now, he had to do something that may just cause her to turn away from him. He had to tell her about the Kyuubi. "If you would, can you go ahead please," he said, a serious note in his voice. Hinata was about to climb from the bed when his hand caught hers and tightened on it. "There's something I have to tell Hinata-heim." For the first time, he used the name he had only ever used to speak to her with others, a deliberate choice to show how much he thought of her, his princess. As the others nodded and left the room, although the appointed chaperone didn't go far, stopping just beyond earshot, he turned to Hinata. "Hinata-heim," he whispered, not wanting to speak loudly, and he had her full attention. "What do you remember from classes about the Kyuubi no Yoko?" She was a little surprised. She'd been expecting him to apologize for crying on her shoulder, or for putting a burden on her, not a history revision. "It attacked the village 12 years ago, no, 13, now, and was defeated by the Yondaime Hokage." The wry grin on his face said she was right. "Yeah, and a lot of people forget that defeated doesn't always mean killed. Of course, the Kyuubi can't be killed that easily, no matter how strong the shinobi is. But the Yondaime did, at the cost of his own life, manage to seal away the Kyuubi, so it couldn't threaten anyone." She saw this was hard for him to say, and waited patiently for him to continue. "The problem gets bigger. He couldn't seal the Kyuubi into any old object, it had to be significant, and someone had destroyed all the sealing jars that could have been used," he said, just as Jiraiya had told it to him. "Anything else would have been consumed trying to contain the fox's demon chakra, so he had to use a living creature, so that the chakra could be channeled through a chakra network, and that meant a human being, as nothing else would have one complex enough. And it had to be done as the basic chakra network was forming, so that the network could adapt to its presence, and not cause chakra poisoning from the incompatibilities." He was really glad Tsunade and Shizen had taught him medical terminology. "So he sealed it in a baby, born that very night." Hinata was stunned. She was a very intelligent girl, very nearly a match for Sakura in the academic scores, and she could see the inevitable conclusion. The Yondaime Hokage was such a man that would not ask of another what he could not give himself, she'd learned as she grew up. Her Tusan had always said so, and she'd heard similar thoughts expressed by others. So when her Narukuin mentioned the baby, she knew that the baby was himself, and more than that, he could only be the son of the Yondaime. At no point since the attempt to abduct her when she was a child had she been so terrified. Naruto saw the effect, and smelled the fear, and began to reluctantly turn away. So it came to him as a great shock when she grabbed him, pulling him close against her in a deep hug, and he turned his face towards hers. At the same moment Hinata had hugged him, pressing herself against him to reassure him. She murmured into his ear, before it turned. "Oh, my poor Narukuin, that's terrible." But he hadn't heard her, or he had and it simply hadn't registered, as his head turned, and she turned hers to look him in the eyes. With both faces so close, the awkward angle meant they had to tilt their heads a fraction, and their inexperience at being this close to another gave them no distance to judge by, and their lips gently brushed together. The burgeoning couple froze, lips against each other, for a good minute before they leaned back, parting reluctantly, both reddening in a by now familiar manner. Yen, Naruto babbled, his voice faint, even as that one part of his mind beat the rest into a confused daze, and screamed out how good that had felt. "Oh yes, breakfast." He stood quickly, accidentally dragging Hinata with him as he did, and went to step over to his clothes. Since she hadn't let go of him, this led to the two of them sprawling on the floor in a startled heap, much to the amusement of their chaperone. For a moment they lay there, Hinata savoring the sound of Naruto's heartbeat even as he discovered how much he adored the smell of her hair, before he broke the silence. "Thank you, Hinata-heim," he whispered. Raising her head, she stared into her fiancé's eyes. She just loved being able to use that word for Naruto. "Why, Narukuin? I haven't done that much." Shaking his head as they struggled to their feet, and gathering his clothes to get changed for breakfast, he smiled. "That's not true. You accepted me, even knowing about my furry passenger. You were and remain my best friend, and when you held me last night," here he blushed as much as she ever had, "I didn't have nightmares, because I knew I was safe. When I was abducted back then, I was experimented on, and I was dying and met the QB deep inside my mind. The place was terrible, a real sewer, and there was only a single ray of sunlight there, a ray of sunlight from a girl I saved from bullies, who apologized for her minder, and thanked me." Turning, he returned her embrace with a hug of his own, the first real one he'd ever given. "Now, I'd better get changed for breakfast." Yamanaka Inoichi stepped out of the prisoner's mind, and gave Ibiki the identity he needed. As the scarred man started cursing, he gathered the news wasn't good. "That man died last night after these men were caught," he said. "Choked to death on a fishbone, apparently. Someone is entirely too good at setting up a chain of events and cutting the links we really need." Growling, he began to report for the Hokage. With manipulation and conspiracy on such a scale, the whole thing was being arranged at a much higher level than he was currently equipped to deal with. Team 8's first D-ranked mission was the acquisition of furniture for Naruto's new house. Apparently, the Hokage provided both a mission and a budget, one supplied by the originally reluctant insurance company, who'd quickly changed their minds when the Hokage pointed out that not paying up could be considered theft from an active duty shinobi, and would hardly inspire others to use their services, maybe even costing them customers. Kurenai assigned them all roles based on their capabilities. Hinata got to match the furniture's styles, and was good at it, while Shino and his Kikeichu ensured that the pieces were not subpar rip-offs. Naruto, with his abundance of shadow clones, got the task of moving the purchases around the house until Hinata told him it looked right. In less time than he'd originally thought, he was moved in. It had been a whirlwind of a day, and once all the training in the morning and events of the previous night and that afternoon caught up to him, Naruto was glad the day was done. He even decided to treat his team and sensei to Ichirakus to celebrate. Seventh seal, emerge. Hinata relaxed from her stance as Naruto struggled up from the ground. Their sparring session today had been intense, and he was at a heavy disadvantage. Kurenai had taken a leaf from a more experienced Jonin's book, and over the past few weeks had been training them with weights on. The effects of the training didn't seem to be much, but then today she'd had them take the weights off to spar. Even Shino had been much improved, although it wasn't possible to train his Kikeichu this way. Today also marked their 20th D-rank mission. The chores were usually tedious, but with a modicum of teamwork and effort, not really that challenging. Occasionally, Naruto would feel melancholy over the loss of the apartment he'd called his home. Despite the fact that he did have a new one, it didn't feel like home yet. In these moods, Hinata would simply give him a hug, and the knucklehead ninja would smile and throw himself back into training. For the past week, he'd begun a new tradition. At the end of each training session, he and his girlfriend, most people wouldn't understand them being affianced at their age, would share a simple, chaste kiss before parting ways. Dinner for the two was as often together as apart, and occurred at his new home as much as at hers. Surprisingly to many shinobi, Team 8 actually looked forward to those missions involving Tora, the cat that most genin lived in dread of. Naruto would easily find the feline, Hinata, and he would play with Tora for a little, and Shino with his Kikeichu would dispose of the poor cat's fleas. Then they would return him to his owner where he would inevitably escape once more. Kakashi glared at the two missing nin called the Demon Brothers. This was meant to be a basic C-rank mission for Team 7 to cut their teeth on, and it was one they'd received after Kiba and Sasuke had gone off on how boring and useless the D-rank missions were. Still, his team had meshed well, with Kiba recognizing Sasuke as an alpha, and slotting himself into position as a good beta, and the two worked very well together. Sakura had seen the two pushing each other to greater heights, and strove to better herself so she didn't hold them back. All three had recognized the incongruity of the puddle, and were ready. Sakura did freeze for a moment when Kakashi seemed to be torn apart by the razor chain between the brothers' gauntlets, but had recovered in time to attempt an intercept, fortunately unnecessary, but still, when the two brothers attacked the bridge builder, Sasuke had nailed the two missing nin to a tree by that very chain, as the young kunoichi shielded their client, and while the demon brothers were breaking their gauntlets loose of the chain, they were hit by Kiba and Akamaru with their Fang over Fang technique, at which point their sensei had reappeared and caught their foes in ninja wire. The interrogation had gone smoothly, especially when the infamous copycat Kakashi thanked his new victims for their timing, as he'd been looking for some bodies to teach his Genin TI techniques. Now Kakashi had a dilemma. The fact that this Gata had hired Momochi Zabuza, the demon of the bloody mist, automatically bumped what should have been a low C up to a high B, maybe even an A. That was bad. Sasuke wanted to go on. Sakura realized that they weren't equipped or ready for this as they were, and Kiba actually had the best idea. "It's not our call, Kakashi-sensei," the Inuzuka had said. "It all goes by your decision, that's why you're the sensei. Like Sasuke, I want to show what I can do, but if you say we go home, there we go." A few moments of thought produced an insight Kakashi would not have expected from the genin. What would Shino say? He muttered before turning to Tazuna. "Hey, you said you couldn't afford a B-rank team, what about another C-rank? It's cheaper than a B-rank that way, and there are 2 jonin along too, with a total of 6 genin." Once more he turned to Kakashi-sensei. "If we can contact the village, we can drop all this in the Hokage's lap." The one-eyed jonin made up his mind, and summoned his fastest Ninken hound. "Take this message to the Hokage." Things got a little complicated. Yuhi Kurenai stood before the Hokage's desk. Hiruzen had acted quickly once he'd read Team 7's report, and pondered what to do. Although Kiba seemed to have opted to fill a beta role in the group, his pack as it were, he had displayed good alpha instincts about how to proceed, and the old ninja made a note in the boy's file to that end. "So do you understand your team's mission?" he asked, smoke trailing upwards from his pipe. Kurenai nodded. "Team 8 is to rendezvous with Team 7 and provide additional support and options for dealing with a number of missing nin and local bandits and thugs. Primary role is scouting, recon and pursuit. Secondary is combat support," she replied. Put that way, it sounded easy, but with the demon of the bloody mist involved, it was likely anything but. "Very well," the Hokage said, praying that he was choosing the right path here. "Your team is to prepare immediately, and leave at noon." "This is insane," Kiba thought as he stared at the rabbit below the shuriken. "I swear, sensei, I smelled someone there," he said aloud, and Kakashi nodded, stretching his senses to take in as much information as possible from around them. Since Team 8 wasn't accompanying a civilian like Tazuna, they would be able to travel further and faster each day, and staying in one spot would have been an invitation to attack. So Team 7 had continued, and their counterparts should be showing up soon. The sudden rush of breaking bushes alerted Kakashi, and he yelled for his team to get down. Sakura tackled Tazuna to the ground, as Kiba obeyed without hesitation, and Kakashi leaped away from the path of the spinning sword, a massive length of single-edged steel 2 handspans across, as it whirred through the shrubbery like a hurricane, destroying all that it came in contact with. Sasuke jumped high as it powered past him, slamming into a tree trunk and stopping, driven halfway through it in an impressive display of brute force. As they picked themselves up, a man landed on the hilt of the sword, balancing there as easily as though he were on the ground. "Ah," said Kakashi. "Momochi Zabuza, what kept you?" Zabuza was tall and muscular, a fact easily discerned since he wore no shirt. His pants were an odd blue camouflage pattern, and like Sharingan Kakashi, he hid the lower half of his face, although behind bandages rather than a mask. The Konoha Jonin's nonchalant response was not what he was expecting, and he turned and pointed. "The infamous copycat Kakashi. I have no quarrel with you, but that man has to die." As the fight began, Naruto held up his hand. Thanks to Hinata, they'd spotted the other team just before Zabuza appeared, and the attack was underway before they could act. Still, Kurenai had held them back. Their first focus was recon, and so she set their senses to work. Hinata had spotted that the Zabuza in the tree had no chakra network, just a solid mass of it. That said, he was some kind of clone, water if the Mist Nin's speciality was true. Since that concurred with what Naruto smelled, they waited. Once the real Zabuza acted, they would join the fight. But there was more. The missing nin from the 7 swordsmen was not alone, he was working with a partner, one with unknown abilities. They had to hatch a strategy to deal with that, and it hinged on surprise. As they were, the members of Team 7 didn't seem to need help yet. Kakashi was getting frustrated. Even with his Sharingan, he was barely keeping pace with the missing nin. Twice he'd been close enough, only for his blow to glance off the scratched Terigakure Hitai that Zabuza wore. All it took was one misstep. As the water prison sprang up around him, Kakashi realized he made that misstep. He was trapped, and it was up to his genin now. Praying they'd live through this, he almost missed the ripple as reality was replaced as Zabuza's water clones toyed with and slaughtered the 3 genin. Scattering their bodies piecemeal across the clearing, he laughed, taunting Kakashi, who had his face in his hands as his shoulders shook. Huh, the former Miss Shinobi grunted with disgust, sweeping his blade through the neck of Tazuna and letting the corpse fall to the ground. Is that all it takes to break you, Hatake Kakashi? Another shinobi, this one wearing a Mist Hunter Nin mask, stepped into the clearing. Zabuza-sama, he said. He carried himself with an unconscious grace, and an air of suspicion. That was an easy assignment. I would have thought someone as powerful as Hatake Kakashi would be more of a challenge. The swordsman's eyes widened as he saw that Kakashi was not shaking in sorrow-filled sobs, but an attempt to stifle his laughter. Damn it! He swore. Genjutsu. Kai! He formed the hand seal, even as his companion did, and all signs of the bloody battle faded away, revealing the members of Team 7 to be unhurt, and Kakashi to be standing in front of them beside a woman with messy hair and red eyes, dressed in a red dress and white wrappings. His companion fell as he was hit from behind by a number of strikes that hammered at his chakra network, dropping the younger missing Nin to the ground, his chakra sealed away, with a midnight-haired girl standing over him, her pale eyes wide and surrounded by raised chakra coils. Haku, he muttered, and began to form the hand seals for his water clones, only to notice a number of strange bugs crawling on him, reducing his chakra by draining it from him. He still had some, but not enough for clones. He raised his sword, and charged the bridge builder, sweeping the sword in a wide arc that he knew would not stop, just as a small orange blur dropped from the tree above, straight in the sword's path, and brought up his hands, crossing the 3 claws protruding from each in front of him as he braced for the inevitable impact. Since Zabuza had sundered many larger and sturdier-looking weapons with Kubikiri Bucho, he put a little more force into the blow to overcome the slight resistance of a human body. Naruto's feet dug into the ground as the huge sword hit his bone-metal claws, and forced them back, almost as far as his chest. Drawing his chakra into his bones and muscles, the blue-eyed Jinchuriki fought back, sliding to a halt even as Zabuza put both hands on his hilt and pushed. Naruto saw the look of fear on Hinata's face as she watched, and something clicked. Back when he told her about his passenger, she hadn't been scared of him, but for him. If he died, he'd leave her alone in this world and that would hurt her, and nothing was allowed to hurt his Hinata-heim. With a growl that started deep in his throat, no, deeper, in his gut, Naruto reached deeper down and pulled harder at his chakra, blue fire pouring from his whisker marks. Huh! Was it? What's going on? Why'd you wake me? From deep inside Naruto's mind, his reluctant tenant was awake once more, after a nap of over 3 years. Glancing at his host's recent memories and thoughts, he was impressed at what he saw and a little scared. He would have thought the kid would have needed to tap into his power a lot more than he had over the years, and the only reason he was doing it now was to protect that tiny girl, his mate, by the way humans reckon such things. Well, the Kyuubi no Yoko certainly understood loyalty. Hell, yeah, brat. Show them what you can really do with this stuff. Hinata was the only one to see it begin, the only one who could see it as crimson chakra swept through Naruto's system, pouring into his bones before reaching his face, and letting the boy sweep his claws forward and out, in opposite directions, slicing through the blade of the sword like a fish through water, sending the pieces flying. Zabuza stared in shock at the pieces of his sword as they scattered apart, 2 even sections from the middle, small ones, and the bulk of the blade from beyond the claws, which dug into the dirt. As he stood there, for an instant only, paralyzed by shock at the genin who'd shredded his sword, he knew he could repair it by killing people, with the blade restoring itself from the iron in their blood. But that was a lot of people. Kakashi and Kurenai both struck, and although he managed to stop both of Kakashi's strikes, Kurenai's blow to the base of his skull sent him off to oblivion for now. Naruto straightened up, his chakra reserves incredibly low. He saw Hinata, her eyes shining with tears of pride and joy, and all was right with the world. Shino nodded to him as he glanced over that way, and he nodded in return. Sasuke was staring at the Jinchuriki, openly envious of his former classmate's abilities, and Sakura looked a little scared. Kiba looked like he wanted to roll over on his back, throat exposed, just to be on the safe side, and deep inside Naruto, the Kyuubi chuckled at the thought. Kakashi and Kurenai watched him closely, assessing him as a threat. Hey, Kurenai-sensei, Sol okay, I'm just a little bit tired now, Naruto mumbled as the chakra exhaustion caught up with him. Think I overdid it. The blonde Jinchuriki began to collapse, and Hinata dashed in to catch him, toppling with him to the ground. Deciding what to do with their prisoners was a major chore. Kakashi and Kurenai had to confine them and keep watch over them, but Tazuna still needed to work on the bridge. A simple roster was arranged where the genin would operate in pairs, 1 genin from each team, to defend the old man, while the others rested or trained, getting tips from the jonin not watching the 2 missing Nin. A messenger hawk had been sent off to Kanehigakure, with a full report for the Hokage. Shino and Kiba had guard duty, and the 2 girls were sleeping as Sasuke and Naruto sparred, fighting back and forth across the yard. They had mastered the basic idea behind tree walking very quickly, although Naruto needed a little more chakra as he was a bit heavier. Then it was lunchtime, and the girls were woken for the meal. It would be their turn to guard Tazuna soon. As Naruto swallowed the first of his supplement pills, Sasuke spoke up. What are those? he asked. Naruto picked up the second pill. They're a special supplement that's necessary for me, otherwise I have problems with my bones, he replied matter-of-factly. My claws and bones are this weird amalgam of bone and weapons-grade chakra metal, and without the supplements, they won't grow right. Are they why you're so strong? Sakura asked, her curiosity popping its head up. Your bones? The blonde laughed a little. Partly. He gripped his chin in thought. Hinata-chan already knows the story, but it's not a nice one. Are you sure you want to know? Kiba, Shino and Tazuna arrived for lunch, and once they heard what was going on, they too admitted wanting to hear the tale. Sasuke insisted on it. If you can get that powerful, I'll get twice as powerful. After all, you're just an orphan. Hinata shook her head as Naruto sighed. Sasuke, all being an orphan means is that your parents are both dead. Who else here fits that bill? There was silence as everyone glanced at the Uchiha heir. That hardly matters, the dark-eyed boy stated firmly. I need that power. If I don't avenge my clan, who will? Naruto stared in disbelief at the other boy for a minute. Sasuke was obviously obsessing to a very unhealthy degree, but the blonde didn't know what he could do about it. Sighing, he began the tale. You can't have my abilities, because how I got them would kill you. It was a flat statement. If it weren't for the Kekkai Genkai of the Uzumaki, Saiko Katsuryoku, I would have died 3.5 years ago, Sakura interrupted him. Wait, you can't have a Kekkai Genkai, only clans have those. The Uzumaki are a clan, Naruto replied. My mother's clan. I haven't been told who my father was. Mostly that was because, in case his suspicions were anywhere close to accurate, he was carefully avoiding asking. Back then, I was taken to the hospital. Sasuke was stunned. None of them had much appetite after hearing Naruto's story. He told them all of what happened, up until Tsunade had found him. He was depressed a while afterwards though, and had spent the rest of their break for lunch wrapped in the Hyuga girl's arms. It was one thing to be told that power had a price, and another to hear first-hand experience of some of the worst of that price. The Uchiha was starting to wonder if vengeance was worth it at that cost. Maybe he should rebuild his clan first. Sakura was confused. That Baka Naruto was a powerful shinobi. That was hard to imagine, yet he'd proven it. He had a clan? Unlikely, but possible. He had not one, but 2 Kekkai Genkai. That was stretching her belief too far, but then, how often had he healed faster than he should have? When had he last been sick? He had those bone metal claws, and there was no reason to disbelieve that the material extended throughout his skeleton. So why wasn't he part of the CRA her mother was always harping on about? She would have to do some research when she got home. Kiba was of two minds. Hinata seemed so different, stronger somehow. She hadn't stuttered, let alone fainted, in Naruto's presence even once, and her eyes were always flicking in his direction when she could see him. Her hands touched him at every chance, but she didn't seem conscious of it. A light brush of her hand across his shoulders would make him smile. Meeting his gaze would make her do the same. It was like watching some old married couple, one of the happy ones, where they just knew they were meant to be. He recalled the incident about the jacket, and he recalled that she'd received a new jacket with the Uzumaki symbols just after graduation after that test to see who was on teammate for that matter, and Hinata had exploded at her new sensei on behalf of Naruto. Kiba let go of any hopes of being more than Hinata's friend. Hope Naruto knows how lucky he is, he mused. Shino, Kurenai and Kakashi had heard parts of the story, little tidbits compared to the tale they just heard. It was terrible, no one should have to suffer that happening to them, and yet this boy had. He'd even emerged stronger for the ordeal, and it was one that would have broken some adult shinobi. It was unbelievable, but Naruto left them no choice but to believe it. Tazuna had scheduled a rest day today, so that his workmen could spend time with family, and so could he. The temperamental little Inari, Tazuna's grandson, had not got off on the right foot with Naruto. When he'd spoken of heroes dying for nothing, Naruto had laughed, a bitter, humorless chuckle. Listen up, brat, he retorted, startling the small boy into silence. Because one of those heroes died for nothing, as you put it, Konohagakure still exists, and was able to send us to help you. That hero gave his life to save his home, and every person in it, even the ones who didn't like him, and if I'm ever regarded as half the man, half the hero he was, I'll be overjoyed. His eyes flicked to Hinata, and back. I don't think I'm a hero yet. I'm just someone who suffered and survived. But one day, I will be. Kakashi nodded as he reached into his vest, and his hand emerged holding several slips of paper. Time for training, he said, passing out the papers to each genin. This is chakra paper, made from trees grown in areas naturally rich in chakra. What we're going to do today is determine your chakra nature and elemental affinities. This will give you an edge when it comes to learning certain jutsu. Traditionally, the Uchiha have a fire affinity, enabling them to learn those jutsu more easily, and more powerfully at that. He paused a moment, as everyone looked carefully at their paper. Some people even have more than one affinity, or an unusual affinity that is a combination of two others. Our prisoner Haku, for instance, has the Hayatan bloodline, giving him an ice affinity. That affinity balances wind and water. The genin all nodded, except Naruto. How do we tell what our affinities are? He asked. Kakashi smiled with his eye. It's simple, actually. You channel your chakra into the paper. Wind cuts the paper, water soaks it, fire burns it, lightning crumples it, and earth turns it to dust. The more exotic affinities require a more creative interpretation. The two teams wasted no time in channeling their chakra into the paper, one by one, so they could each see what the others got. Sasuke's paper crumpled up and caught fire. Sakura's turned to dust before turning to mud as it became soaked. Kiba and Shino's shared the affinity for earth, but Shino's paper crumpled first, where Kiba's dust caught fire, causing a small explosion as the dust ignited. Hinata surprised everyone as her paper was cut down the middle, with one half becoming soaked while the other crumpled into a ball. Naruto's chakra paper also revealed a triple affinity, where in place of water he had fire. Kakashi was intrigued. Between the two teams they had all 5 elemental natures, in some interesting combinations. With earth and water natures, Sakura had some promise as a medic nin, for example. Alright, now that we have knowledge of your affinities, we have to develop them. Each of you should focus on one nature at a time, as the exercises are completely different. Naruto and Hinata discussed the whole thing at a glance. Wind, they announced in unison. Sasuke chose lightning, because his family training had already covered his fire affinity. Sakura chose water, and Kiba and Shino selected earth. When Naruto dropped what he was doing, and ran towards Kakashi, it was obvious that something was wrong. It was swiftly confirmed as the boy spoke quickly. Kakashi-sensei, he said, the bridge is being attacked. The shadow clone I left there just dispelled. Kakashi got to his feet. Much as I hate to say it, Team 7's task is to protect Tazuna, not the bridge. On top of that, someone has to stay here to watch the prisoners. Shino spoke up, his clever mind working quickly. Perhaps Tazuna-san wishes to take the prisoners to see the hope they would have extinguished? He suggested. That would put us all in the right place at the right time. Kakashi nodded. Sakura, Hinata, let Kurenai know about the plan, and help her get the prisoners to the bridge. If Zabuza complains, tell him he might be able to earn his and Haku's freedom. With that, the genin split up. The bridge was the site of a large number of thugs, drinking and smashing things they didn't understand, and vandalizing the bridge. They weren't very effective at destroying the structure, and the bridge was sturdy enough that it would take expertise to bring it down. Gato stood there, directing the rabble in their tasks, but his skills lay in business and dirty dealings, so he was little more effective. Still, if he occupied the bridge, no one could finish it. As he turned, he saw the ninja the useless old man had hired, and grinned. That blasted Zabuza had failed to eliminate the builder, so he would have to be killed, too. Also, if the ninja were here, then there was no one guarding Tazuna's home. He raised his cane and struck it against the bridge, attracting the attention of his minions. As the heavily outnumbered genin stood there at the foot of the half-finished construction, the business tycoon pointed his cane at them and drew breath to speak. Naruto's voice rang out across the bridge. This is the guy everyone's scared of? He's shorter than I am. 8th seal, preserve. Naruto's outburst caused all attention on the bridge to be aimed at him. As Sasuke stepped away from the other boy, and Shino and Kiba dropped their faces into their palms in their hiding places, Gato gave his first threat. Give up now, Tazuna, or your family will be a lot smaller by nightfall. Pfft. Naruto struggled against it, but had to laugh, startling Gato and drawing Tazuna's eyes to the orange-clad boy. Ha ha. Try again. If the men you sent are anything like the rest of this lot, my Hinata-chan could take them all, and she's not alone. Hinata looked down at the would-be swordsman she'd taken down, and then looked over at Sakura's foe. When they'd spoken of what they were going to do to the women and girls, either genin had been able to stop themselves. Hinata had hit this one so many times without her weights that she very nearly destroyed the pitifully underdeveloped chakra network the thug possessed. He would be in pain for a long time, and some of his internal organs would never be the same, removing him as a threat to any woman ever again. Sakura had achieved a similar end, but lacking the Byakugan and the precision strikes of the gentle fist. The pink-haired daughter of 2 first-generation shinobi had to resort to the basics. Brute force. She'd hit the man with blows of a strength she'd never known she had, and his bones weren't just broken, but in some places, shattered. Haku and Zabuza, who'd been discussing possible strategies for escape and evasion, stared blankly at the girl's handiwork. Turning to Kurenai, the missing mean swordsman struggled to keep a tremble of not fear apprehension. Yeah, that's it from his voice. We'll behave if you promise not to let them do that to us, he said, gesturing with his head towards the moaning heaps of former thug. Now, about earning our freedom, Hinata's voice called out. Sakura, you help Kurenai-sensei. I have to get to Narukuen. Gato couldn't believe this brat. Laughing at him. He, who had dragged himself up from a cart driver to the wealthiest man in several nations. This was not to be borne. Raising his cane once more, he pointed it at Naruto. Kill them all! He screamed, and the horde of thugs rushed to obey. Hinata had barely arrived at the bridge when the tycoon's henchmen charged, and the battle began. Naruto was suddenly all business as he crossed his fingers in the familiar hand seal of his favorite technique, and 100 orange-clad shinobi now occupied the area, denying the thugs exit from the bridge. As she ran forwards, pushing herself to get where her Narukuen was, although how she could pick him out among all those shadow clones she still couldn't guess, the chakra coils around her eyes raised up as she opened the Byakugan. Shino's Kikeichu were of limited use here, so he was mostly fending off the thugs with the staff while they were swarmed into unconsciousness by the Kikaichu, injecting foreign chakra into their systems and forcing chakra shock. Kiba and Akamaru were using their Fang over Fang to great effect. It seemed designed for such large-scale operations, and Kakashi and Sasuke were simply taking down foe after foe. Any of the thugs that came too close, she shut down with a single gentle fist strike, her mind idly wondering what would happen if she were to put some elemental chakra through it. She hadn't developed her affinity well enough to experiment yet, she realized, and continued to fight as she moved forwards. Naruto had seen Hinata arriving, and moving in his direction. With a grin as the thugs charged, he extended his claws and launched himself, all of himself, into the fray. But where his Kage Bunshin fought mostly to keep the thugs on the bridge, Shino's plan, he didn't like the idea that they might get to the village and take hostages. Naruto himself was in the very thick of the fight. The numbers were beginning to tell on him as he swung and sliced. Then one of the thugs got hold of him from behind and grappled him, so that another could stab him from the front. Naruto furiously pulled on his chakra to do something, and was rewarded by the thug behind screaming and releasing him just in time for him to slash the incoming blade to the side and hammer his elbow into his attacker's temple, dropping him. The fight had paused as everyone stared at the blonde. A series of bone metal spikes, perfectly lined up with his spine, because they had emerged from his vertebrae, ran down his back, bracketed by an array of 3 spikes that protruded from each shoulder blade. Those in front of him saw more. At the point of his chin and the corners of his jaw more spikes had sprung forth, and a mask of bone metal ran around his eye sockets, spikes at the points of his cheekbones and brow. This intimidating sight was bad enough, but with his whisker marks glowing blue with chakra, it became downright terrifying to those who didn't know him. As one, the thugs fighting Naruto began to back away, clubs, knives and swords falling from terrified fingers as they fought, not to win, not to slaughter and inflict pain, but to escape, and the easiest escape was over the edge of the bridge. After all, it was only water, and water is soft, right? Of course, a drop from the height of the bridge meant that the water was just as good as stone to the hapless men who took that route. Of those fighting the other shinobi, surrender seemed a much better option, although none got the chance to surrender to Hinata, who simply knocked them out and kept going, getting closer to her Naruto. At the very edge of the half-finished bridge, Gato cowered, blubbering out offers of money and power if Naruto would only spare his life. Naruto raised his fist to Gato's throat and snarled. "You sicken me," he growled out. "You reduce people to numbers, and tried to keep everything yourself." One claw, the one on the near side of his hand, extended, sliding past Gato's jaw and barely grazing his skin as it passed along his face. "You starve the innocent and terrify the people, all to worship money, and miss the true meaning of wealth." The furthest claw extended this time, actually scratching the tycoon's brow. Naruto's sapphire eyes nearly glowed against the bone metal covering much of his face. "I have a third claw," the bone metal wielder noted. "But you aren't worth it." Stepping back, Naruto turned to walk away. Gato saw his chance and seized it with both hands, whipping out a switchblade knife and driving it into Naruto's back, right over his left kidney, at a downward angle. It was a blow to cause a slow death, a painful one, and this monster deserved no less, for daring to threaten the mighty Gato. Even as Naruto went to one knee, the agony washing all thought from his mind, he heard Hinata scream. Naruto, the girl with the midnight hair, moved before anyone could think to stop her, her hands charged with chakra, as the limited learning she had of wind chakra came together with her gentle fist, and her 2-finger flick to Gato's forehead shocked them all as the business magnate's eyes glazed over. As she turned to Naruto, already gathering him in her arms face down, the knife still protruding from his back, Gato's ears released a fountain of red and blood, and a grayish liquid seeped from his nose as his eyes rolled back in his head and he toppled from the bridge. Kurenai, Zabuza and Haku had arrived for the tail end of the fight, leaving Sakura to watch over Tazuna's family, with the thugs fleeing in panic. They saw Gato lash out at Naruto, and Hinata's response. As the body of Gato hit the water far below, Zabuza cleared his throat. "If she can do that with 2 fingers, Haku, remind me not to piss her off," he remarked, swallowing. As his ward nodded, the missing mean swordsman ran back over his memory of what he'd just seen, even as Kurenai ran towards her genin. It looked like she'd somehow disrupted the man's brains within his head, with a single touch, that didn't seem to do more than lightly tap against his forehead. Naruto opened his eyes as the pain in his back lessened. There was a tearing agony, gone in a second, as someone pulled the knife out, and he dropped his head to savor the soft pillow beneath him. This was Hinata's lap, he could tell by her scent, which also told him she was worried for him, acrid overtones on her enjoyment of being his pillow. He could feel his chakra swirling towards his lower back as Kurenai and Shino applied the bandages. An important thought occurred to him, and he tried to straighten up despite the pain, only to discover his Hinata was much stronger than she looked as she held him in place. "Gato," he croaked, his throat really dry for some reason. A blank look descended on Hinata's face, and he knew what had happened, even before she spoke. "That man will never hurt another again, Naruto. I lost my temper, and I think I overdid it." He smiled as she used the phrase he'd spoken when he'd sliced up Zabuza's sword. "It was a wand thing, if a sincere one. Better him than us than you," he murmured. "I'm sorry." Hinata was blindsided by the apology. "Why?" she asked. Because if I had just killed him, Naruto said in explanation, he wouldn't have stabbed me, and you wouldn't have had to kill him. So I'm sorry. She wrapped her arms around his head, even as he felt the wound sealing. His Sokai Katsuryoku apparently healed the most dangerous injuries first, because it was now restoring both the skin and the nerves in it. Kurenai and Shino were openly staring at the injury, which was healing faster than they could treat it. Naruto's bone metal protrusions had retreated once more, leaving holes all over his shirt and jacket, and leaving them all with much to ponder. Zabuza and Kurenai had, with Tsunami representing the locals, negotiated a long-term contract between Momochi Zabuza and Nami no Kuni to establish a minor shinobi village to protect the tiny land, ensuring that no one like Gato could come to power again. The former missing nin was now the Shodame Shiakage, at least on paper, of Shiogakure no Sato, the village hidden in the tides. Now he just had to worry about the construction of the village and recruiting those who would be decent ninja for it. He had a few ideas on that front, especially with the bloodline purges that had plagued Kiri. Even though the bridge was yet incomplete, there was little doubt that the mission was done. Kurenai spent some time with Hinata, trying to help her deal with the consequences of her first kill. A painful thing for the gentle young woman. By no means was she a girl any longer, and the nightmares that would come in the night. It was of little surprise that Naruto was her greatest source of comfort at this time, and the two of them were often found in the mornings curled around each other fully clad. Of course. Indeed, on those occasions that they were not, both slept badly, waking from their respective nightmares ready to fight. Finally, the two jonin gave up and shuffled the sleeping arrangements around a little, but always had someone watching the couple. Naruto's newfound ability to manipulate his bone metal was just begging to be further explored, but Kurenai put her foot down and insisted it only happen in the safety of Konoha. Accepting it with a grumble here and there, the genin all turned their energies towards their elemental chakra training. Once they all managed the first step, they were put to practicing the next phase of chakra control, water walking. Although the genin were more than happy to attempt this, there were a few hiccups. Shino refused to attempt this on any body of water that he could be immersed in. The colonies in each abirame reacted badly when they were deprived of air, and in such situations, it was not unknown for them to die before they got a chance to drown. Naruto's problem came to light when his first attempt to water walk failed, and he plunged straight to the bottom of the water. Fortunately, Kakashi and Kurenai dragged him out from the surface, a little surprised at his weight, before breathing became an issue. With Hinata's help, and the fact he couldn't float, let alone swim effectively as motivation, he redoubled his efforts. By the time Team 7 and 8 reached the gates of Konoha, the genin had grasped the technique to their sensei's satisfaction, and were permitted to begin the exercises for their second element. Sasuke, already having reached this point, received a scroll with a few jutsu that related to fire and lightning. The Uchiha smirked at Naruto, and when the two teams were dismissed with instructions to write their mission reports to the Hokage, and deliver them in the morning, he wandered off towards the Uchiha estate. For a change, Sakura didn't try to follow along behind him, instead heading home to do some long put-off research into clan symbols, clan rites, and Kekkei Genkai. Naruto invited his teammates, and Kiba, who'd been left behind by his teammates, to dinner at his place that night, so they could discuss and write their reports together. Hinata nodded, and also asked to invite her father and Hanabi, which Naruto warily agreed to, and the group parted ways. Somewhere in Ta no Kuni, a hidden complex held the stronghold known as Otogekure no Sato, a new hidden village that was ruled by the sinister Orochimaru. It was he who sat reading a report he had been waiting for, and he was overjoyed. The last Uchiha had awakened his Sharingan, and all the other pieces were in place. In just a little while, the Chunin exams would begin, and he would destroy Konoha and take the Uchiha legacy for his own. He was startled when a description of the other genin on that mission was included, especially that of a blonde boy with unusual abilities. This bone metal manipulation sounded somewhat like the dead bone pulse that Kimimaro possessed, but there were differences. He paused as he realized that this boy must have been that experiment that had been dying at his previous stronghold, the one that was massacred. The boy's own Kekkei Genkai had been overwhelmed by the experiment, and he should have died. He made a note to one of his teams to observe the boy's progress. It was possible he'd need a contingency plan, and this boy's two Kekkei Genkai intrigued him. Maybe he should mark them both and let them fight it out to be his next vessel. He giggled at the thought. No, for now the Uchiha was enough. Maybe after he'd mastered those wonderful eyes, he could try to claim the other genin's Kekkei Genkai. But first, he had a village to destroy. The chief medical officer at Konoha's hospital turned the analysis of Gato's corpse over to the Hokage, as Kurenai stood before his desk. The paperwork stack was larger than the last time she'd been here, but not the largest she'd ever seen. As Hiruzen scanned the report, he nodded. This was incredible, almost unbelievable. And all because of the conformity, and thus stagnation that the Hyuga main house had insisted on, it would have remained unguessed at. The gentle fist was a style that lent itself to earth and water manipulation more easily, and by Kurenai's estimate, Hinata had been mostly unaware of what she'd done. But if the autopsy were to be believed, the young Kunoichi had used the gentle fist technique to strike at a tenketsu located in the target's brain, and unleashed wind chakra into his skull cavity, with the resulting overpressure literally scrambling everything inside. The man was dead before he even knew she touched him. Informing Kurenai of this took but moments. Now, what are your opinions on your genin, Kurenai-san? He then asked. Kurenai didn't even have to think. They are all well above average, each in their own way. I was wrong about the way Naruto's presence affected Hinata, too. Instead of distracting her, it seems he spurs her on. It's something I just didn't understand at the time. She shook her head. On top of that, with them as an example, Shino is pushing himself to figure out new uses for his Kikeichu colony, and methods to avoid relying on it overly. His staff forms could use a little more polish, but other than that she paused as she realized what the Hokage was really asking her. I'd put them forward for the Chunin exams today, if it weren't for the clause Hyuga Hayashi put in their contract they're supposed to wed once they become Chunin, and I don't think he'd want it to happen so soon. Hiruzen nodded. It's very rare that anyone becomes Chunin on their first attempt at the Chunin exams, he assured her. I simply thought it would be a valuable experience for them in the future. After all, it would certainly let them know what to expect for the next time they are nominated. The red-eyed Kunoichi's snort of disbelief was not the response the old man was expecting. You should read my report again, she said. Naruto has a way of not only pulling off the impossible, but getting his friends to manage it as well. It was considered impossible for a genin to survive fighting Momochi Zabuza. Naruto destroyed his sword. It was impossible for a fresh genin to kill with a touch. Hinata eliminated Gato in that way for stabbing Naruto. I'm just waiting with bated breath to see what piece of conventional wisdom about the impossible Shino tears apart. She suddenly remembered exactly whom she was ranting at. My apologies, Hokage-sama, but Naruto he seems to take impossible as a challenge, not a limitation. Sarutobi Hiruzen nodded. As well he should, he replied, sliding a number of forms across the table. Entry forms for the Chunin exams. And if he manages it again, here I'm sure he'll take Hayashi-san's advice when it comes to when the wedding will take place. A sense of foreboding washed across him. I just hope I'm there to see it. As Kurenai was leaving, she passed a bald, goatee-wearing Chunin with dark glasses. Shinshiro had a pile of mission reports from Team 10, it seemed, and a number of complaints for the Hokage. She nodded as she passed, and smiled as he disappeared into the office. As Naruto wandered the long street back to his house, pondering what to prepare for dinner, he paused, leaning against the fence as he did. Looking up at the clouds, he waited a few moments, and sure enough, after a little while, the walls started to wriggle and complain as Sarutobi Konohamaru dropped the camouflage sheet that was meant to resemble the fence. Erg, he groaned, I give. As Naruto released the younger boy, he gasped for air. How about you have your friends join us, Kono-kun, the blonde said offhandedly, gesturing towards their hiding places, as a girl with orange hair and a boy with glasses stepped out from behind a pole and a garbage can respectively. You were right, Konohamaru, said the girl, impressed despite herself, and Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. The scarf-wearing boy grinned in response. See, I told you my Oni-san was cool, he said, before turning towards Naruto. How'd you know? Naruto rubbed the bridge of his nose as he crouched down. Don't you think you should introduce me first? He asked. You've told them who I am, but that has to go both ways. I don't just reveal my secrets to anyone, you know. Now Konohamaru rubbed at his neck, mimicking a boy he saw as worth copying, even if he wasn't aware that's what he was doing. Sorry, Oni-san, he replied. I got carried away. These are Yudatane Moegi and Koetsuji Udan. They don't have clans, and haven't got any clan stuff. So I figured if I stick with them at the academy, and help them with the stuff that a family or clan would have already taught them, that way we get better shinobi when we graduate. Besides, they're my friends now, and that's what friends do, right? Naruto smiled. That's exactly right. So why are you three chasing me down? The obvious spokesman for the small group spoke up. I wanted to show off my Oni-san, and these two wanted to meet you. But you really are good. I mean, we've been looking for you for days and couldn't find you. I was going to ask Aji if he knew where you were, but I thought it'd be better if we found you on our own. The other boy sniffed, his nose a little runny. Allergies, thought Naruto, handing him a handkerchief. Thank you, Uzumaki-sama, the boy said, and blew his nose. His little team stared at him, then at Naruto. As Naruto's raised eyebrow invited him to explain, a trick the genin had perfected by watching his soon-to-be father-in-law, Udan explained himself. Konohamaru kept going on about his new Oni-san, and how he had a rival to become Hokage, and Moegi's Oba is always complaining about the Uzumaki estate sitting stagnant when it could be doing something for the village. One of my hobbies is heraldry, so I can recognize most of the symbols and emblems in use today. He paused for breath before continuing, his voice sort of stuffy. The red and white spirals are worn by Chunin and higher as part of the treaty that allowed the founding of Konoha, although prior to 53 years ago, during the Nidame's rule, the spirals were both white. Other than that, the spirals can only be worn by the members of the Uzumaki clan, of whom there is only one. Hence, you are Uzumaki-sama. The boy's reasoning was impressive. Naruto nodded. Very good, he said slowly. Maybe you should have the hospital give you something for those allergies. Udan shook his head. They tried. I was allergic to it. Konohamaru was shortly pestering Naruto to play ninja with them, but Naruto declined. If he'd never been abducted, he might feel differently, but as it was, now you're part of the academy, you don't get to play ninja, he said to them. It isn't a game. It's a way of life, and a serious one at that. Remember what I said about becoming Hokage, Kono-kun? It's no less important than that. Ninja are there like he scoured his mind, trying to find a way to explain it. It's like the village is a person, he finally concluded. The Hokage's the head, because he has to make all the decisions, and the civilians are the body, the parts that allow the rest of the body to do what it does. The ninja are the village's arms and legs, the hands and feet. They go where the Hokage tells them and they do what he tells them, all to protect the body. But they're also the eyes and ears, bringing information for the Hokage to use to make his decisions. Moegi raised her hand as if she were in class, and Naruto grinned as he waved for her to ask. So who's the heart? Naruto raised his head and stared off towards the Hyuga compound where Hinata was no doubt asking her father and sister to dinner at his place at that very moment. At a whim, Naruto decided to ask for help with dinner that night, maybe that barbecue place that Chuji had always liked in the academy? The heart is different for everyone. It's the most precious people that each of us has, the ones we'd do anything, become anything for, and even die to protect. For a moment he recalled all Tsunade had told him about his mother, and then spoke up again. So I won't play ninja with you, he said, watching as the slightly crestfallen children accepted that with a stoic reserve. But I will give you an impromptu training session for the next. He glanced at the sun and shadows. 20 minutes, then I have to get dinner. If I can catch all of you by then, as my prisoners, you'll have to help me out. Okay? He was trying hard not to laugh at the eager faces as they nodded. Escape and evasion. Go! As Naruto raced in pursuit of Konohamaru and his friends, he saw that they had a good sense of each other, and acted as a team. Whenever he'd get close to one, another would race in and distract him away at the critical point. Still, this was Naruto, and even without the self-imposed rule of no shadow clones, he'd managed to capture Udon and Moegi, who were following him now, but weren't allowed to interfere. As the Hokage's grandson ran down a narrow street, he looked back over his shoulder to see where Naruto had gotten to, and slammed into someone. Looking up revealed a man in an odd black jumpsuit, like a stagehand at a play, except for the red and orange circle on the front. He wore facial war paint, and had an hourglass shape under a bar on his hitayate, and carried a heavily bandaged shape on his back. As the stranger, a bit older than Naruto if he was any judge, lifted Konohamaru by the front of his shirt, smirking in a menacing fashion, a blonde girl in mesh and a short kimono walked closer, her hair arrayed in 4 short tails sticking out behind her. Her hitayate matched the boy's, and Naruto went to high alert, feeding chakra to his senses and sniffing at the air even as Udon spoke up nervously. That's the emblem of Sunagekure no Sato, there are allies, I think, he muttered. Naruto nodded as the Suna Kunoichi spoke. Kankuro, he's just a kid, let him go, she said, a slightly cruel smile on her face, knowing that her brother wouldn't let it go so easily. Indeed, Kankuro ignored the suggestion, holding Konohamaru at arm's length in a needless display. Why, Tamari, is there a size limit on brats now? I feel like toying with my prey for a while. Unless he can apologize real quick with his weight dragging at his scarf and shirt. The Konoha Academy student was hard-pressed to breathe, let alone speak. There was a blur of orange, and Konohamaru was replaced by a hissing tag, which the surprised Tsunade nonetheless got rid of as fast as he could, throwing it down the street, where it burst into a thick cloud of white smoke, revealing Konohamaru gasping for breath. As the painted shinobi started to move, he found a hand upon his shoulder, and turned to look into sapphire eyes. As hard as the stone they resembled in the face of a shinobi younger than he was. Tamari stepped back in shock as this boy appeared out of nowhere, suddenly gripping Kankuro's shoulder and glaring at him. Kankuro went for his puppet, a tactic she knew well enough that she went for her fan, only to pause as 2 claws slid from the boy's fist, bracketing her throat, while 3 claws emerged from his other hand and slashed through the bandages holding Kankuro's puppet. She swallowed nervously as she saw the spacing of the claws on that other hand, noticing that it meant he hadn't extended the middle one on this hand, a fact she could live with because he had, she wouldn't have. Kankuro froze at the claws held in his direction. The first hostile move was yours, Tsuna-san, the boy said quietly, before raising his voice. Kono-kun, could you and your friends get an order of barbecue from that place near the Akimichi estate? There'll be 10 of us eating, and I'll pay you back after we're paid for our mission. The boy nodded, a little startled at his Ani-san having those claws, and the 3 student shinobi took off. Naruto turned to the kunoichi and spoke politely. This was a really sticky situation. If you would kindly request your other sniff brother join us, we can speak like civilized homicidal maniacs, he grinned, sliding his claws back into his arms, as the redhead with a gourd on his back dropped from the tree. Naruto's passenger groaned. I recognize that smell of blood and sand, Gaki. This guy is something like you, not as powerful as me of course, and nowhere near as well adjusted. The strange Suna shinobi glared at Naruto. Kankuro, Tamari, he said in a dead tone. You are a disgrace. He focused on the blue-eyed Jinchuriki. You are strong. Your blood will satisfy my mother. Do not die until I kill you. Naruto formulated a new personal rule. Do not unnecessarily antagonize a crazy person. I'll try not to disappoint, he said. I am Uzumaki Naruto. If we are to face each other, we should each know the name of the other, yes? I am Sabaku no Gara, the stranger said, his tone still dead and flat. You have learned the names of my siblings. Goodbye. Tamari, Kankuro, come. 1 second, please, Naruto said to the kunoichi, who seemed to have the fewest screws loose. Why are you here in Konoha? The blonde kunoichi from Suna glared at the blonde ninja from Konoha. We're here for the Chunin exams. I hope you weren't planning to survive them. What if Naruto has adamantium bones? Council bashing, Sim and harem. And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoyed this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.